Chapter 22:18. After all, if the participating disciples did not stay in one place to wait for the battle, it would not be easy for that person to walk up to the tournament stage from the crowd when the call came. The disciples from the four side palaces stood in four different areas and were not too far apart. At this moment, they were full of energy and looked around in high spirits. Today was the stage for them to perform. As outstanding cultivators, they were very willing to let everyone know how powerful they were. By the time Bailey Hongzhuang arrived, more than half of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's participating disciples had already arrived. She stopped at the back of the crowd. As soon as she appeared, Bailey Hongzhuang could feel a lot of disdainful gazes falling on her. Yesterday, ever since they found out that Bailey Hongzhuang would be taking part in the Battle of the Four Palaces, the participating disciples had gone back to ask about the results of the test that Bailey Hongzhuang had entered the apparatus. However, all the disciples who were asked shook their heads, as if they could not say anything. Most importantly, the palace lord had instructed them not to say anything. After finding out the answer, the participating disciples understood the answer even more clearly. They did not need to think to know that Bailey Hongzhuang's powers had not reached the standard to take part in the Battle of the Four Palaces. It was only because of her status as the young sect master that Bailey Hongzhuang had been given a place. In order to cause an even bigger commotion, the palace lord had ordered all the disciples to keep their mouths shut. But so what if they had kept their mouths shut? One would only need to think carefully to know the answer. Hence, the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's participating disciples looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with even more unfriendly gazes. They had relied on their own hard work to get to where they were today. Bailey Hongzhuang had only relied on one layer of relationship to obtain all of this so easily. Some of the disciples could not help but wonder if Bailey Hongzhuang would use this layer of relationship to directly obtain a place in the Battle of the Deer. If that was really the case, it would be too unfair to them. This Bailey Hongzhuang really likes to be in the limelight. Since she's an alchemist, she should just be an alchemist obediently. Why must she come here to join in the fun? I don't believe that young sect master will still give her a place in the battle for the throne if she can't enter the finals. That's right. If that's the case, even the young sect master won't be able to escape the gossip. The disciples of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with displeasure. The other disciples in the group were all powerful people, and they knew each other well. Only this Bailey Hongzhuang was nothing. Bailey Hongzhuang raised her eyebrows slightly when she heard the discussion of the disciples. It seemed that everyone had a lot of opinions about her. Master, these fellows' words are too harsh. I'll go scold them. Xiaohei had always been hot-tempered. She could not hold back at all when faced with such a situation. Before Bailey Hongzhuang could stop her, Xiaohei's angry voice rang out. What are you guys talking about? You don't know anything. If you don't have the power, just say it. Why are you still pretending to be all high and mighty? What other abilities do you have apart from belittling others? Xiaohei placed her hands on her hips and stood on Bailey Hongzhuang's shoulder. She looked as if she could hold back 10,000 men and compete to see who could scold the other more. The disciples of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall had originally wanted to ridicule Bailey Hongzhuang. No one had expected that Bailey Hongzhuang's contracted beast would actually start scolding her. Chapter 22:19. If Bailey Hongzhuang knew what these disciples were thinking, she too would not be able to resist ridiculing them. Yesterday, she was just too lazy to bother about it. Not that she didn't dare to bother about it. To her, the amount of criticism she had suffered along the way was just too much, and she had long stopped caring about what others thought. After all, people live for themselves, and she couldn't be bothered about what others thought. But when Xiaohei said that, the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's disciples' gazes all fell onto Bailey Hongzhuang. From their point of view, they didn't think that it was Xiaohei who had scolded them. It must be Bailey Hongzhuang who had instigated her contracted beast to stand out and scold them. This move was truly despicable enough. What we've said is the truth. If you hadn't relied on your relationship with the young sect master, how could you possibly obtain the quota to take part in the competition of the four palaces? Tan Yuehan's face was filled with displeasure and anger. As a lady, she had put in a huge amount of effort to obtain her current position in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, which was filled with talents. Originally, she was the limelight in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. But ever since Bailey Hongzhuang appeared, everyone's attention had shifted onto Bailey Hongzhuang. On one hand, it was because Bailey Hongzhuang could possibly be the future young sect master's wife. On the other hand, it was because of Bailey Hongzhuang's outstanding looks. However, this Bailey Hongzhuang obviously didn't have a body constitution that attracted people's affection. Even though Bailey Hongzhuang's background and looks weren't bad, but she was still the target of suspicion in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. However, ever since the alchemist competition had ended, the situation had changed, and many disciples had changed their views towards Bailey Hongzhuang. She was originally feeling displeased, but Bailey Hongzhuang was only an alchemist and didn't have much interaction with her, so she didn't mind. However, Bailey Hongzhuang had now taken part in the competition of the four palaces, so naturally, she felt extremely displeased when she saw Bailey Hongzhuang. "You idiot! My master got it with his own ability, and I'll say that you got it by relying on some messy connections." Xiaohe was an expert at stirring up trouble. It did not care what other people said. Anyway, it did not know what they were talking about. All it needed to do was to slander them. Everything was that simple. "You're talking nonsense." Tan Lihan was so angry that her chest heaved up and down. It was obvious that Xiaohe was furious. "You're the one who's talking nonsense. Your whole family is full of nonsense." Xiaohe hopped on Bailey Hongzhuang's shoulder. She was best at talking. Even if a few more people were scold her, she would not be afraid at all. Xiaobai was also good at fighting, but now that it saw that Xiaohe was able to completely stun this guy, there was no need for it to step forward and show off its strength. Bailey Hongzhuang had never been afraid of shedding all pretense of cordiality. Usually, she couldn't be bothered to say it because she couldn't be bothered. However, when this kind of thing really happened, she didn't care in the slightest. Since so many people in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall were not convinced, then she would make them completely convinced. There was only one way to do it: beat them up. "Bailey Hongzhuang, don't go overboard." Tan Lihan stared angrily at Bailey Hongzhuang. Her voice had not been the loudest, but she never thought that after Xiaohe had spoken, she would be the only one to speak. Chapter 2220. The Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's participating disciples were all looking at the conflict between Tan Lihan and Bailey Hongzhuang with great interest. Previously, when everyone was verbally attacking Bailey Hongzhuang, they naturally didn't mind joining in. However, since Bailey Hongzhuang had started to retaliate, no matter what, they still had to take into account the young sect master's identity. Even if they felt disdain towards Bailey Hongzhuang for breaking the rules to obtain such a quota, but the young sect master's identity was there. If they were to directly clash with Bailey Hongzhuang now, wouldn't that mean that they were dissatisfied with the young sect master and palace master Qin's decision? The bird that sticks out gets shot, so they would never do something that was disadvantageous to themselves. However, for a hothead like Tan Lihan to be willing to directly clash with Bailey Hongzhuang, they were happy to see that. Seeing that Tan Lihan had taken the initiative to provoke her, Bailey Hongzhuang lightly turned around, and her cold and distant gaze sized up Tan Lihan for a moment. Her red lips parted slightly, and her voice was cold. "Tan Lihan, from the beginning to the end, it was you who was attacking me, and I didn't say a single word. Now you're asking me not to go overboard?" Bailey Hongzhuang's expression became increasingly cold, and her eyes were as cold as ice. "I think you're the one who shouldn't go overboard." Following Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Tan Lihan's expression froze. From the looks of it, the matter indeed seemed to be as such. That's not right. Tan Lihan wasn't intimidated by Bailey Hongzhuang's words as she continued. "Doesn't your contracted beast words represent your own words? That's what you think, not what I said." Bailey Hongzhuang's expression was indifferent and her state was elegant. She didn't seem to care about Tan Lihan's words at all. Looking at Bailey Hongzhuang's indifferent look, Tan Lihan felt even more displeased. It was obvious that Bailey Hongzhuang was the one who had no ability. Now, Bailey Hongzhuang was standing at the top to criticize her. This was too funny. Bailey Hongzhuang, I didn't expect you to be so good at quibbling. This must be how you got your ability to get in through the back door, right? You obviously don't have the strength, yet you still took up a spot. You are really shameless. Tan Lihan originally had some scruples about Bailey Hongzhuang's identity, but now that she was angry, she couldn't care less. As soon as these words came out, the disciples present all looked at each other in dismay. It seemed that the conflict between Tan Lihan and Bailey Hongzhuang was about to escalate. No matter how calm Bailey Hongzhuang was, in the face of Tan Lihan's accusation, she would definitely lose face. Just when everyone thought that Bailey Hongzhuang was about to go crazy, Bailey Hongzhuang sneered and her lips curled into a mocking smile. Even if I got in through the back door, what does that got to do with you? If you have the ability, you can get in through the back door. If you don't have the ability, then shut your mouth. Besides, against a pig-like opponent like you, Bailey Hongzhuang disdained to get in through the back door. After Bailey Hongzhuang's words came out, she couldn't even be bothered to look at Tan Lihan. That look was filled with disdain towards Tan Lihan, and even looking at her was a waste of time. Tan Lihan was stunned. The disciples present were all stunned. Was Bailey Hongzhuang admitting that she had gotten in through the back door? But just as Bailey Hongzhuang had said, towards Bailey Hongzhuang being able to get in through the back door, most of the disciples were envious and jealous. Who asked them to not be able to do it? Chapter 22-21. Through the back door? She really did not have that ability. However, Bailey Hongzhuang had actually said that she was a pig-like opponent. Bailey Hongzhuang was only a new disciple, and a new disciple who had spent all her energy on refining pills. Now, she had actually said that she was a pig-like opponent. Tan Lihan only felt a surge of anger in her chest, and she spat out a mouthful of blood. Based on her, Tan Lihan's ranking in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, who would dare to say that she was a pig-like opponent? Just as Tan Lihan was about to rebut Bailey Hongzhuang, a low and cold voice rang out. Tan Lihan, since you are already well aware of it, why continue to fuss over it? Hearing this voice, Tan Lihan was slightly taken aback. She immediately looked towards the man who had spoken, and her face instantly turned red as she nodded. Bailey Hongzhuang also looked towards the man who had spoken. The man was handsome, and his posture was steady and cold. His coldness was different from Gong Shaoqing's indifference. His coldness was more like a form of contempt. He despised everyone around him, so he was very cold, because these people were unable to receive any of his attention. Shun Xiuhan, the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's #1 disciple, was a cultivation maniac. Usually, the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's disciples rarely saw Shun Xiuhan. Even if it was the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's internal competitions, Shun Xiuhan would not even bother to participate. However, even though Shun Xiuhan rarely appeared, his position as #1 was still extremely stable. He had a very high reputation in the hearts of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's disciples. The existence of the most powerful cultivator had always attracted attention. Shun Xiuhan glanced coldly at Bailey Hongzhuang. It was just a glance, but Bailey Hongzhuang could clearly see that it was full of disdain. It was as if Bailey Hongzhuang, a person who had walked through the back door without any real talent, was beneath his notice. Compared to Tan Lihan's provocation, Bailey Hongzhuang felt that Shun Xiuhan's disdain was even more unpleasant. Who did this guy think he was? How dare he look at her with such a gaze? Fuck, this guy really knows how to act cool. When Xiao Hei saw Shun Xiuhan, she couldn't help but curse. It wasn't that she had never seen a pretentious person, but she had never seen such a pretentious person. Even young masters like Di Beichun, Wen Ziren, and even Imo Yinjua wouldn't dare to look at Master with such a gaze. Who the hell did this guy think he was? As the #1 expert of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, if he doesn't show off, how can he show off how extraordinary he is? However, I'm curious if he can still maintain his arrogance and disdain when he's beaten to the ground. Xiaobai sneered. Acting tough will get you struck by lightning. Xiao Hei, Xiaobai, and Little White Lion were beasts who loved to show off. Now that there was someone who could show off better than them, they were very displeased. They should be the ones in charge of being in the limelight and having their own halo. The voices of the three beasts were not soft, and in an instant, all the participating disciples of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall heard them clearly. Instantly, everyone's expressions became interesting. Shun Xiuhan's expression stiffened, and his expert demeanor was almost broken. Where had Bailey Hongzhuang found such a top-grade contracted beast? He, Shun Xiuhan, had always shown such an attitude after coming to Tianyang's sect. Who dare to criticize him? Chapter 22:22. Even though his anger had reached its peak, Shun Xiuhan still managed to hold back his anger. As the #1 disciple of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, if he were to argue with Bailey Hongzhuang like this, it would be a loss of grace. If word got out, it would be extremely disadvantageous to him. After all, he rarely argued with others on a daily basis. There was only one way for him to argue, and that was to teach the other party a lesson. However, Bailey Hongzhuang had not said anything. The ones who had spoken were Bailey Hongzhuang's contracted beasts. If word of this got out, he would undoubtedly lose all face. After all, Bailey Hongzhuang could say that this matter had nothing to do with him. However, if he were to argue in secret, he would be too petty. Furthermore, teaching Bailey Hongzhuang a lesson was not urgent. After the Battle of the Four Palaces had begun, he would use his own power to make Bailey Hongzhuang understand that he was not acting pretentious. When the cultivators of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall saw that Shun Xiuhan had maintained his silence, their expressions became a little more interesting. It must be said that Shun Xiuhan's usual arrogant and cold style was not the least bit approachable. Many of the disciples were unhappy, but because of Shun Xiuhan's power, they could only swallow their anger. Now that Bailey Hongzhuang's 3 contracted beasts had directly exposed Shun Xiuhan's pretense, they felt extremely delighted. It must be said that they enjoyed a clash between cultivators of such status very much. Tan Lihan glared angrily at Bailey Hongzhuang, her bright eyes filled with anger and hatred. She had always admired Shun Xiuhan. From her point of view, Shun Xiuhan was her future man. Usually, she worshipped Shun Xiuhan the most. Shun Xiuhan was her sky. As a female disciple, Shun Xiuhan was the main reason why she had been able to cultivate to her current level of power. Compared to Bailey Hongzhuang's mockery of her, she was even more dissatisfied with Bailey Hongzhuang's insults towards Shun Xiuhan. No one had ever dared to say such things about Shun Xiuhan. The male god in her heart would not allow anyone to slander him. Tan Lihan had already remembered this grudge in her heart. The battle between the 4 palaces was about to begin. No matter how arrogant Bailey Hongzhuang was, she would not be able to stay arrogant for long. On the contrary, Shun Xiuhan was the main character of this battle. What she hoped for the most now was to be able to meet Bailey Hongzhuang on the tournament stage. However, in the competition between the 4 palaces, disciples from different palaces would face off against disciples from different palaces. She was afraid that she would not have much of a chance. With Bailey Hongzhuang's strength, it was impossible for her to enter the finals. For Bailey Hongzhuang, this incident was just an interlude. Soon, Bailey Hongzhuang turned her attention to the stage. Under everyone's amazed and admiring gazes, a faint golden figure slowly appeared in everyone's line of sight. The 5 palace masters hurriedly stood up and bowed deeply to the handsome man who was slowly walking over. The man looked as if he had walked over under the sun, like the stars surrounding the moon, noble and elegant, unparalleled. In a split second, all the brilliance seemed to be enveloped by Di Beichen. Everyone's eyes were fixed on this figure. Bailey Hongzhuang's lips slowly curled into a smile. Di Beichen was such a breathtaking existence. No matter where he would always be the focus of attention. Chapter 22:23. Just one smile, that moment of youth. Even in such a crowd, they could still see each other at a glance. Di Beichen slowly sat down and waved his hand slightly. The crowd of disciples then stood up straight, full of vigor and anticipation. Quite a number of disciples had noticed Di Beichen's smile towards Bailey Hongzhuang, and they couldn't help but sigh in their hearts. The young sect master's feelings towards Bailey Hongzhuang were indeed not ordinary. Tan Lihan glared hatefully at Bailey Hongzhuang, her heart feeling extremely indignant. She just couldn't stand looking at Bailey Hongzhuang. Apart from her outstanding looks and bewitching looks, everything else about this woman was just average. However, the young sect master's honorable presence was actually so affectionate towards Bailey Hongzhuang. It was really hard to imagine. In terms of looks, she felt that her looks weren't too bad either. In comparison, she had liked Shin Xiuhan for a very long time, but he had never expressed his feelings towards her. Although her power couldn't be compared to Shin Xiuhan's, it wasn't too bad. The gap between the two of them wasn't that huge, but she could always feel that Shin Xiuhan cared about her. However, the gap between Bailey Hongzhuang and the young sect master was simply a chasm that was difficult to cross. Even so, the young sect master had still acknowledged Bailey Hongzhuang's existence in front of everyone. The gap between the two of them was just too big. While Tan Lihan was glaring hatefully at Bailey Hongzhuang, Bailey Hongzhuang didn't pay any attention to Tan Lihan. However, she could still feel her gaze. It looked like Tan Lihan really hated her this time. But even so what? Since the young sect master is here, let's begin the competition between the four palaces, shall we? Qin Ai's face was filled with a warm and benevolent smile as he asked Di Beichen respectfully. Di Beichen nodded slightly and said, "Since everyone is here, let's begin." After receiving Di Beichen's approval, the palace masters and elders were all smiles. Di Beichen immediately stood up and looked at the dense crowd of disciples below the high platform. His voice was magnetic and loud. The Battle of the Four Halls has always been a tradition of the Tiangang sect. The ranking of the Battle of the Four Halls is also related to the distribution of resources in the following period of time. Presumably, everyone was paying close attention to this competition between the four palaces and had been looking forward to it for a long time. At the same time, everyone should know that this Battle of the Four Palaces will affect the Battle of Zhuolu in 3 months' time. Once one participates in the Battle of Zhuolu, as long as one performs well in the Battle of Zhuolu, one's name will truly spread throughout the world. Therefore, in this competition between the four palaces, I hope that everyone will be able to bring out their true strength. As Di Beichen's voice fell, the eyes of all the disciples present lit up, especially those participating in the competition. This was a crucial moment for their future. Speaking of which, the disciples who were participating in the Battle of the Four Palaces felt that they were exceptionally lucky. Coincidentally, the Battle of the Four Palaces was related to the quota for the Battle of Zhuolu. If it had been any other time, they wouldn't have had such an opportunity. I believe that everyone is ready. Then, I hereby announce that the Battle of the Four Palaces has officially begun. In a split second, the atmosphere in the entire battle arena changed. All the disciples looked at the stage with great anticipation. The exciting competition would begin here. Chapter 22-24. Under everyone's gaze, Qiao Yingzi slowly stood up. The great elder had completely disappeared from Tiangang's sect. Therefore, Qiao Yingzi, who was originally the second elder, was now the great elder of Tiangang's sect. The preliminary round uses the method of drawing lots. Disciples who draw the same number will compete with each other. The order of the competition will be determined according to this number. Number 1 is the disciple in the first round of the competition. Number 40 is the disciple in the last round of the competition. Does everyone understand? In the process of this competition, only drawing lots was the fairest method. Disciples understand. The participating disciples of the four major branch halls responded one after another. Now, the participating disciples can come up to the stage to draw lots. Listening to Qiao Yingzi's words, the disciples of the four major branch halls walked up to the high platform one after another. This drawing lots was also an opportunity for them to show their abilities. When every disciple walked up to the high platform, there would be a burst of discussion below the high platform, as the existence of the top 20 of each branch hall of Tiangang's sect. They had always been known by everyone. The participating disciples were even more arrogant. They were already the existence of powerhouses to be able to obtain a place in this competition. Bailey Hongzhuang also walked up to the high platform. After drawing her lot, she walked back to her original position. When Bailey Hongzhuang walked back to the preparation position of the participating disciples, she found that everyone's position was according to the order of the competition. In this way, they could also see who their next opponent was. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes lit up. Everything was really simple and clear. Bailey Hongzhuang was number 27. Her appearance was a little late, so her position was also a little further back. Her opponent was a male disciple of the Azure Dragon Hall. However, she didn't know much about the Azure Dragon Hall and didn't know how strong her opponent was. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang looked at the male disciple's gaze also fell on Bailey Hongzhuang. The moment he saw Bailey Hongzhuang, the male disciple was obviously stunned for a moment. After he reacted, he revealed a smile. Bailey Hongzhuang also responded with a smile. Tan Lihan and Shun Xiuhan's rankings were relatively high. Tan Lihan was in the 7th round, while Shun Xiuhan was in the 15th round. Coincidentally, she could also understand their strength through their competition. After drawing lots, the first round of the competition began. There was only one huge battling platform in this huge martial arts arena. The scale was extremely vast. After the referee elder introduced the names of the two disciples and the sub-palaces they came from, the competition officially began. This battle was just as Bailey Hongzhuang had expected. The strength of each disciple selected from the sub-palace was not weak. On this martial arts stage, they even used all their skills. Their combat strength was very astonishing. Therefore, they were in a stalemate when they exchanged blows. Both sides were in a deadlock, and no one could do anything to the other for a while. However, one couldn't help but admit that the strength of these disciples was really outstanding. The collision of their martial skills and battle experience would often cause the disciples and the spectators stand to cry out in surprise. Through watching this competition, they understood the difference in strength between themselves and the disciples on the ranking board. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang was watching the competition, a voice rang out beside Bailey Hongzhuang. Chapter 22-25. Hearing this unfamiliar voice, Bailey Hongzhuang was a little surprised. She had never met this Yichenyu before. However, since the other party took the initiative to express goodwill, Bailey Hongzhuang didn't mind making another friend. Of course, the premise was that the other party didn't have any other thoughts. So, it's senior brother Yi. Sorry for the disrespect. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled lightly. Junior sister Bailey doesn't spend much time in the palace. I presume you don't know much about your opponents. I've always liked to collect information, especially about the participating disciples. I have some understanding of their strength. Why don't I introduce them to junior sister Bailey? Yichenyu was obviously a friendly person. After seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang didn't reject him, he immediately began to introduce. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. She indeed didn't know anything about the participating disciples. This was a bit disadvantageous. If someone could introduce her, she would naturally be very happy. Then I'll have to trouble senior brother Yi. Your opponent is Lu Zhengyang of the Azure Dragon Palace Hall. I can say that junior sister Bailey's luck is very good. Yichenyu smiled lightly. He believed that there were many people who were envious of Bailey Hongzhuang's good luck. Bailey Hongzhuang raised her eyebrows slightly. She had more or less understood Yichenyu's meaning. This Lu Zhengyang is at the bottom of the participating disciples of the Azure Dragon Palace Hall. If there are no accidents, he will definitely be eliminated in the first round. He is 21 this year and has been the Tiangang sect for 2 years. His current cultivation is between Green Realm Level 9 and Green Realm Level 1. As far as I know, he was still Green Realm Level 9 before. However, I feel that in order to have a good performance in the competition between the 4 palaces, he must have tried his best to break through to Green Realm Level 1. The last 40 disciples participating in the competition between the 4 palaces have about the same cultivation. However, everyone's fighting strength is different. However, the first place of the 4 palaces is much stronger. Yi Chenyu earnestly explained the situation to Bailey Hongzhuang. The participating disciples of Vermilion Bird Palace Hall didn't know of Bailey Hongzhuang's strength, but he did. This was because when Bailey Hongzhuang was taking the test yesterday, he was also in the stone room and personally saw Bailey Hongzhuang's heaven stage. Even in the entire Tiangang sect, how many disciples of this level could appear? Therefore, he knew that Bailey Hongzhuang was not weak. By the time Bailey Hongzhuang stood on the martial arts stage and began to compete, the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall disciples would probably be stunned. He had already admired Bailey Hongzhuang very much during the alchemist competition. In addition, Bailey Hongzhuang was a cultivator who had been evaluated as a heaven stage cultivator, which made him admire her even more. Moreover, Bailey Hongzhuang was very amiable and approachable. He was very happy to have the opportunity to be friends with Bailey Hongzhuang. After Bailey Hongzhuang understood LV Xingyang's strength, she understood in her heart. She didn't expect that her luck in randomly drawing lots would be so good. This way, she could still hide a certain amount of her strength in the first round of the preliminary competition. I didn't expect Senior Brother Yi to understand the situation of these disciples so well. I really admire you. Originally, Bailey Hongzhuang didn't pay much attention to Yi Chenyu's words. After all, as long as one stayed in Tiangang sect long enough, it was normal to have some understanding of some disciples. Chapter 22-26. Junior Sister Bailey is too polite. With Junior Sister's ability, it's easy for you to obtain this information. It's just that Junior Sister is busy and doesn't know much about it. In fact, most of the disciples participating today have some understanding of their opponents. In this way, we can reduce the possibility of being at a disadvantage when we fight. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. She knew that Yi Chenyu was telling the truth. The Battle of the Four Palaces this time was related to many things. Every disciple was thinking of ways to make full preparations. It wasn't difficult to obtain information. As long as they walked around a few palaces and spent some resources to inquire, they would definitely be able to obtain the information they wanted. However, none of the disciples were fools. Thus, they would hide some of their strength. However, the gap wouldn't be too big. Bailey Hongzhuang had previously spent all her time on raising her cultivation and didn't have the time to pay attention to these things. She never thought that Yi Chenyu would tell her about these things. Senior Brother Ye's information is very helpful to me. However, I still want to know some information from Senior Brother. Bailey Hongzhuang slowly said. Yi Chenyu smiled. Junior Sister Bailey, if you have any questions, just tell me. I will tell you everything I know. To him, most of this information was known to everyone. If he could make Bailey Hongzhuang think highly of him, he would be extremely happy. Of course, the information he gathered was more specific than what the ordinary disciples gathered. I wonder if Senior Brother Yi can introduce me to the strongest of the four palaces? Bailey Hongzhuang looked at Yi Chenyu. She didn't pay much attention to the strength of the ordinary disciples. However, the strongest of the four palaces were definitely extremely powerful. Once they entered the finals, they would definitely encounter each other. She had to understand more. Originally, she planned to wait until the end of today's competition to find out more. However, since there was Yi Chenyu, who was extremely knowledgeable, she naturally wouldn't go too far. This is naturally not a problem. Yi Chenyu smiled. The strongest of the Azure Dragon Hall is called Xiao Feilin. He's 23 years old and has been famous in the Azure Dragon Hall for a long time. When he first entered the Tiangang sect, he was already very powerful and deeply praised by the Azure Dragon Hall Master. Under the nurturing of the Tiangang sect's resources, his potential completely exploded, and the speed at which his strength increased was extremely shocking. For the past year, he had been in seclusion and could be called a cultivation maniac. He had never fought with anyone, so it was difficult to judge his strength. However, it is said that before he went into seclusion, his cultivation had already reached Green Realm level 9. At the mention of Xiao Feilin, Yi Chenyu couldn't help but sigh. The strength of such an expert was simply too shocking. Even if the cultivators behind him tried their best to catch up, they were still too far away. Bailey Hongzhuang secretly exclaimed in her heart. Sure enough, the first rankers of this branch hall were all extremely terrifying existences. Their talent and strength were both astonishing. The strongest person in the White Tiger Hall is called Xiao Feiyu. She and the Azure Dragon Hall's Xiao Feilin are blood siblings. Both of their talents are extremely shocking. However, these two people had always regarded each other as opponents and wanted to defeat each other. Therefore, when they first entered Tiangang's sect, they chose different branches. Chapter 22-27. After learning that Xiao Feilin and Xiao Feiyu were actually a pair of siblings, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but sigh. The genes of this pair of siblings were truly amazing. Our Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's #1 expert is Shun Xiuhan. He's 24 years old, and very few people are able to communicate with him. Shun Xiuhan can be said to be the most difficult person to approach among the experts of the four palaces, but his strength is also admirable. In this year, Shun Xiuhan is the same as Xiao Feilin, always in a state of seclusion and rarely appears in front of everyone. It could be assumed that the experts of the four palaces had already known about the Battle of Zhuolu. Therefore, they had put all their efforts into improving their cultivation in order to perform well in the Battle of the Four Palaces. The strength of the experts of the four palaces is not too different, so the ranking has always been controversial and has never been confirmed. Hearing that, Bailey Hongzhuang glanced at Shun Xiuhan indifferently. Although Shun Xiuhan was arrogant and disdainful, she had to admit that he did have his own abilities. The #1 expert of the Black Martial Hall is Yin Bin. Like his name, he is straightforward and can be said to have a violent temper. Moreover, Yin Bin is famous for being a battle maniac. As long as there is a disagreement, he will start a fight. Thinking back, the Black Martial Hall master also felt very helpless towards Yin Bin, but because Yin Bin is indeed a cultivation genius and has now become the #1 expert of the Black Martial Hall, the previous problems naturally disappeared. Under Yi Qinyu's reminder, Bailey Hongzhuang sized up the appearances of the four great experts. Xiao Feilin and Xiao Feiyu were indeed brother and sister. Their appearances were very similar, but after looking at them for a while, she felt that Xiao Feilin was more feminine and Xiao Feiyu was more masculine. As expected, the extremely similar faces were of completely different genders. After looking at them for a long time, it was quite magical. Needless to say, Shun Xiuhan was cold and arrogant, looking down from above, with a bit of the demeanor of an expert. Yin Bin was like his name. Just by looking at his appearance, one could tell that he was not someone to be trifled with. However, his appearance was very outstanding, just like a sunny and handsome man. However, any disciple who had some understanding of Yin Bin knew that all this was just on the surface. If anyone provoked him, it would be really troublesome. Even Shun Xiuhan and the others were not willing to have any conflicts with Yin Bin. When the disciples of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall saw that Yi Qinyu had taken the initiative to curry favor with Bailey Hongzhuang, they were somewhat astonished. Yi Qinyu's ranking in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall was also not bad. His strength was also very high. Furthermore, Yi Qinyu had another ability, which was that he was extremely good at gathering information. In fact, although everyone was very unhappy that Bailey Hongzhuang had obtained this quota through the back door, there were still many disciples who wanted to curry favor with Bailey Hongzhuang because of her identity. Therefore, when Tan Lihan and Bailey Hongzhuang clashed, no one helped Tan Lihan. However, no one expected that Yi Qinyu would take the initiative to befriend Bailey Hongzhuang. Moreover, Bailey Hongzhuang also recognized Yi Qinyu as a friend. Yi Qinyu's actions were really fast. When Shun Xiuhan saw that Yi Qinyu and Bailey Hongzhuang were chatting happily, he could not help but furrow his brows. However, he quickly returned to his usual appearance. In the process of this conversation, the competition continued. Chapter 22-28. As long as the disciples ranked in the bottom 40 became their opponents, the competition would take a little more time. However, the higher the ranking of the disciples, the less time they spent in the battle. It was almost as if the battle ended in a single exchange. Just from this point, it could be seen how big the difference in strength between the first and the 20th disciple was. Bailey Hongzhuang faintly sighed. The huge Tiangang sect was really full of talents. Wanting to enter the finals was not an easy task. As for ranking in the front, that was even more difficult. If she had not been in closed-door cultivation for the past 3 months, it would have been impossible for her to obtain a place in the Battle of Zhuolu. Very quickly, the first disciple of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall went up. Bailey Hongzhuang saw that this figure was very familiar because this person was the eldest senior brother of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, Gue Jinyuan. Thinking back to the first time she went to the arena, Gue Jinyuan told Bailey Hongzhuang a lot of information about the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's cultivation. However, she rarely appeared after that and naturally did not have the chance to see Gue Jinyuan again. Bailey Hongzhuang had a very good impression of the approachable Gue Jinyuan. Previously, Gue Jinyuan had been standing very close to the front, so Bailey Hongzhuang did not notice him. Now that she saw Gue Jinyuan go up the stage, she finally noticed. As expected, as the eldest senior brother of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, Gue Jinyuan's strength was extremely powerful. Although he was not the #1 expert of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, his ranking would definitely not be bad. After Yichenyu saw that Bailey Hongzhuang seemed to be very interested in Gue Jinyuan, he could not help but say, as the eldest senior brother of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, Gue Jinyuan's strength is ranked 2nd in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, 2nd only to Shen Xiuhan. This competition will not put any pressure on Gue Jinyuan. Hearing that, Bailey Hongzhuang nodded. Her thoughts were the same as Yichenyu's. The moment Gue Jinyuan and his opponent exchanged blows, the gap between the two could already be seen. Winning was only a matter of time. In the following period of time, the disciples went up one by one. Time quietly passed in this process. However, the enthusiasm of the disciples around the martial arts stage did not decrease in the slightest. Especially when they saw the disciple they admired going up the martial arts stage. It was as if they had been injected with chicken blood, and they cheered endlessly. Of course, there were also many disciples who were ridiculed and belittled. Tan Lihan's strength was not bad either. She was at Green Realm level 2. No wonder she was so arrogant before. In the first preliminary round, Tan Lihan won. After the victory, Tan Lihan looked at Bailey Hongzhuang provocatively, as if to say, "Look, I'm the real deal." Faced with Tan Lihan's provocation, Bailey Hongzhuang generously gave her a thumbs up. However, this thumbs up was directed downwards. Tan Lihan was so angry that she wanted to kill Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang, on the other hand, was grinning from ear to ear. Taunting the opponent was good for venting one's emotions, and it was also good for one's cultivation. In the afternoon, after such a wait, it was finally Bailey Hongzhuang's turn to go up the stage. Round 27, Azure Dragon Palace Hall's Lu Zhengyang versus Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's Bailey Hongzhuang. When the referee elder's voice rang out, the disciples present were all shocked. Compared to the top experts' battles, this battle was also highly anticipated. Chapter 22-29. LV Zhengyang was at the bottom of the Azure Dragon Palace Hall, and everyone knew that he was just a cannon fodder. Of course, being able to become cannon fodder in the competition of the 4 palaces was something that many people could not hope to achieve. However, they did not expect that LV Zhengyang's opponent would be Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang was a genius. This was a fact that none of the Tiangang sect's disciples could deny. However, Bailey Hongzhuang was not a genius cultivator, but a genius alchemist. In the alchemist competition, no one was Bailey Hongzhuang's match. However, in the competition of the 4 palaces, Bailey Hongzhuang was at a disadvantage. Hence, even though LV Zhengyang was at the bottom of the Azure Dragon Palace Hall, everyone still thought that LV Zhengyang would win. When the Azure Dragon Palace Lord, Yin Kaicheng, saw that LV Zhengyang's opponent was actually Bailey Hongzhuang, his expression became a little more interesting. Although LV Zhengyang had defeated Bailey Hongzhuang, the competition of the 4 palaces was just like that. Even though it was only the first round of the preliminary round, Whichever palace had the most disciples left would be a kind of glory. Qin Ai saw through Yin Kaicheng's thoughts at one glance and could not help but laugh secretly. Bailey Hongzhuang's power was not as simple as everyone thought. He also wanted to know what Yin Kaicheng's expression would be when Bailey Hongzhuang defeated LV Xingyang later on. Thinking of this, Qin Ai felt very happy. Haha! When Yin Kaicheng saw that Qin Ai was not the least bit helpless and instead looked very happy, his thoughts changed a little. Could it be that there was a trap in this matter? Just as this thought appeared in his mind, Yin Kaicheng felt that it was impossible. After all, Bailey Hongzhuang was a new disciple of the Tiangang sect. Participating in the competition of the four palaces was originally a very disadvantageous matter. Among the disciples participating in the competition of the four palaces, other than Bailey Hongzhuang, no one else was a new disciple. Basically, in every battle of the four palaces, the new disciples did not have a chance, but Bailey Hongzhuang was an exception. The other disciples are disciples who have cultivated in Tiangang sect for more than 2 years. Their age and strength are stronger than Bailey Hongzhuang. Therefore, even if Bailey Hongzhuang had failed in the battle of the four palaces, it would be a very normal thing. Lu Xingyang, your luck is not bad today. You actually drew junior sister Bailey. You will definitely advance to the second round of the preliminaries. The disciples of the Azure Dragon Hall looked at LV Xingyang with envy. This kind of luck was really enviable. That may not be the case. Junior sister Bailey was able to participate in the competition of the four palaces, which proves that she is very strong. Chapter 22:30. Under the high platform, Xia Jiqing and the others saw that it was finally Bailey Hongzhuang's turn to fight, and they couldn't help but be excited. After waiting for so long, Hongzhuang is finally going to fight, haha. We haven't seen Hongzhuang fight for a long time. I don't know what realm Hongzhuang's strength has reached now. Xia Jiqing's face was full of curiosity. In the past, when she cultivated with Hongzhuang every day, watching Hongzhuang's strength increase speed, she only felt that she couldn't catch up. Since entering Tiangang sect, they hadn't seen Bailey Hongzhuang fight again, so they didn't know what realm Bailey Hongzhuang had reached now. Hongzhuang's cultivation talent is very amazing, but the disciples participating in the competition of the four temples have a much longer cultivation time than Hongzhuang. Overall, Hongzhuang is still at a disadvantage. Gong Xiaoqing calmly analyzed the situation in front of him. From the previous battle, it could be seen how strong the disciples participating in the competition of the four temples were. No wonder the new disciples were directly sentenced to death. In the face of such strength, they simply had no chance of winning. Indeed, the disciples of Tiangang sect have no bad talent, so the longer the cultivation time, the more advantage the disciples have. Therefore, among the disciples, only Hongzhuang is the youngest. Dong Fanyu was also somewhat helpless. This was completely an unfair battle for the new disciples. However, Bailey Hongzhuang was able to get the opportunity to participate, which was already very good. Lu Qinyue stared at Bailey Hongzhuang on the high platform. She had a faint feeling that the current Bailey Hongzhuang had completely left them behind. On the martial arts stage, Bailey Hongzhuang and LV Xingyang stood opposite each other, both of their faces showing a polite smile. The competition begins. After the referee elders saw that both of them were ready, he immediately began the competition. Junior sister Bailey, sorry for the offense. LV Xingyang first bowed to Bailey Hongzhuang. No matter what the final result of this competition was, he hoped that it would not cause a rift between them. When Bailey Hongzhuang saw that LV Xingyang's attitude was extremely calm, she also bowed and said, "Senior brother, do your best." In the next moment, Lu Xingyang's Green Realm Level 1 aura gushed out of his body like a bolt of lightning. After sensing LV Xingyang's aura, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but sigh. Yichenyu's judgment was really accurate. Judging from LV Xingyang's aura, he had just broken through to Green Realm Rank 1. "Master, leave this competition to me," Baisher said excitedly. His gaze was completely locked onto Lu Xingyang. This was only the first round of the preliminaries. There was no need for its master to make a move. It would be able to deal with it on its own. As their master's contracted beasts, they were a part of their master's strength. Even on this stage, contracted beasts were allowed to fight. Before this, there were many battles where contracted beasts fought. Contracted beasts could increase a cultivator's strength. Moreover, they were completely trustworthy. Therefore, as long as a cultivator had the conditions to have a contracted beast, they would not be stingy with their wealth to exchange for a suitable contracted beast. In this competition between the four palaces, many disciples had their own contracted beasts. Moreover, they were very powerful. Chapter 22:31. Bailey Hongzhuang was not in a hurry to let Bai Shi fight. However, after seeing how confident and eager Bai Shi was, she felt that it was a good choice to let Bai Shi fight. Bai Shi's current strength was no longer the same as before. Ever since it consumed a large number of blood-colored demon crystals in the desert world, its improvement could be said to be very shocking. Xiao He and Xiao Bai were envious after seeing Bai Shi's improvement speed. However, they could not increase their strength by consuming demon crystals and could only stare in envy. As the only beast king in the world, Bai Shi was born with talents and abilities that many other demonic beasts did not have. All right, then you will fight in this match. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled faintly. Usually, everyone didn't pay much attention to her three contracted beasts, but today, in front of everyone's eyes, she wanted to let these disciples know that her three contracted beasts weren't incompetent. In the next moment, Bailey Hongzhuang slowly took a few steps back under everyone's astonished gaze. Then Bai Shi directly stood in front of Bailey Hongzhuang and confronted LV Xingyang. Seeing Bai Shi's actions, LV Xingyang could not help but be stunned for a moment. He thought that Bailey Hongzhuang would very likely let her contracted beasts fight together. However, even if other disciples fought together with their contracted beasts, it would be a cultivator and a contracted beast working together. However, looking at Bailey Hongzhuang's situation, it seemed that she intended to let this contracted beast fight with him and did not intend to participate. Bai Shi's figure had grown a lot. Compared to when it first came to Tiangang's sect with Bailey Hongzhuang, it was now majestic. In fact, when Bailey Hongzhuang appeared with Bai Shi today, many people had already begun to pay attention to Bai Shi. A contracted beast ability could be roughly judged from its size and strength. Some of the disciples present who knew about contracted beasts began to size up Bai Shi. They had to admit that Bai Shi gave off a mighty feeling at a glance, and was definitely not just for show. Bai Shi did not hesitate to attack LV Xingyang as soon as it appeared. It wanted to finish this battle cleanly. Bang! White Lion pounced forward at lightning speed. White Lion was even taller than a cultivator and had an astonishing aura. LV Xingyang did not dare to underestimate White Lion at all. This contract beast level was not low at all. Its strength was probably not inferior to his. Limitless soft palm. Essence energy surged out of LV Xingyang's palm, attacking the White Lion with a thunderous momentum. White Lion's reaction speed was extremely fast. He flipped in midair and dodged Lu Xingyang's attack. At the same time, he attacked from another angle. The White Lion's speed was extremely shocking. LV Xingyang did not dare to be negligent as he quickly dodged. The moment the White Lion approached, LV Xingyang felt a huge force attacking him. If he was knocked down by the White Lion, his body would definitely be injured. Bang, bang, bang. LV Xingyang constantly attacked White Lion, while White Lion dodged and attacked. Ever since he had trained in the desert world for so long, White Lion, who was already good at speed, was now even faster. His dodging ability was also top-notch. In terms of combat experience, he definitely did not lose to any cultivator. In an instant, LV Xingyang and White Lion rapidly moved around the stage. The scope of the battle shocked everyone. Bang! Chapter 22:32. LV Xingyang's body fell heavily to the ground. White Lion pounced on LV Xingyang's body. Its huge mouth and sharp teeth were clearly visible. LV Xingyang felt cold sweat on his forehead. However, in the next second, White Lion had already retreated a few steps. It clearly had no intention of hurting LV Xingyang. LV Xingyang hurriedly stood up and looked at White Lion with lingering fear. White Lion's combat power was truly terrifying. If he had not judged wrongly, White Lion's cultivation level was above his. His contracted beast cultivation level was above his. Even among the contracted beasts in the entire Tiangang sect, there were not many who could compare to White Lion. Junior Sister Bailey, I've lost. LV Xingyang's attitude was calm as he bowed. From the moment he understood White Lion's abilities, he knew that he would lose this match without a doubt. This was because Bailey Hongzhuang had yet to make a move. Once Bailey Hongzhuang made a move, the result would be obvious. You let me win. Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, Bailey Hongzhuang wins. The referee elder immediately announced the result. The onlookers were all dumbfounded when they saw this scene. Bailey Hongzhuang's victory was just too easy. From the beginning to the end, Bailey Hongzhuang had not made a move at all. She had relied on her contracted beast to crush LV Xingyang. I was wondering why Bailey Hongzhuang was able to participate in this battle of the four palaces. So she relied on her contracted beast. This contracted beast's abilities are truly domineering. LV Xingyang's cultivation level has already reached Green Realm first level. Bailey Hongzhuang's contracted beast is even more powerful. If I had such a contracted beast, how domineering would that be? Everyone's envious eyes fell on Bailey Hongzhuang's body. Such a result was really unexpected. Brother Gong, is Hongzhuang's contracted beast the one I saw in the academy? Lu Qinyue's face was filled with astonishment. This gap was a bit too big. Gong Xiaoqing nodded. It's the same one from back then. However, during this period of time, White Lion's transformation has become even more shocking. Even one of Boss contracted beasts is so powerful. It's practically a one-sided beating. Yuan Jixin couldn't help but sigh. When the Azure Dragon Hall master Yin Kaiqing saw this result, his face instantly stiffened. He had never expected that Bailey Hongzhuang would have such a trump card. He had never discovered it before. Hall Master Qin, you must have known this long ago, which is why you've always been so confident, right? Yin Kaiqing probed. Qin AI smiled faintly, revealing an unfathomable expression. Then he fell silent. However, Qin AI's heart was filled with astonishment. He never thought that Bailey Hongzhuang's contracted beast would be so powerful. This was a huge surprise for him. Moreover, in this way, everyone would think that Bailey Hongzhuang wasn't strong and relied on her contracted beasts. It was a good way to hide Bailey Hongzhuang's strength. Perhaps Bailey Hongzhuang would be able to enter the finals? Thinking of this possibility, Qin AI couldn't help but feel excited. If a new disciple entered the finals of the Battle of the Four Palaces, it would be the first in Tiangang sect's history. Bailey Hongzhuang slowly walked back to the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Everyone's gaze was focused on White Lion, wanting to know what kind of beast it was. Chapter 22:33. Even though everyone was extremely curious about White Lion's breed, no one was able to determine what kind of breed White Lion was. Most of the breeds of contract beasts were known to everyone, but it was their first time seeing White Lion's breed. The reason why no one was able to determine White Lion's breed was because Bailey Hongzhuang had covered up the king word on White Lion's forehead. Otherwise, they would definitely be able to determine the Beast King's identity. Back then, Bailey Hongzhuang had covered up the king word on White Lion's forehead when she had just found out about its identity. Now, she was even more used to it. Otherwise, once everyone knew that White Lion was a Beast King, it would definitely cause an even bigger commotion. Junior Sister Bailey, congratulations. I didn't expect your contract beast to be so powerful. Each of you looked at White Lion in amazement. Before this, no one had expected White Lion to be so powerful. In this way, Bailey Hongzhuang's trump card was very shocking. Once Bailey Hongzhuang and White Lion's strength were combined, Many disciples would not be a match for Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled and said, "Senior Brother Yi, you flatter me." Throughout the entire day, the competition continued without stopping. Every disciple who won had a face full of joy, while the disciples who lost were extremely sad. Once they lost, they would not have any more chances. In this process, the 40 rounds of competition finally ended before the sky turned dark. Xiao Ingze announced the names of the disciples who had advanced to the second round of preliminaries. Tomorrow would be the stage for these 40 disciples. Bailey Hongzhuang could be said to be a spectator for the entire day. She only left with everyone after the competition ended. Bailey Hongzhuang, you're just relying on your contract beast. Although this contract beast strength is not bad, it's impossible for you to reach the finals with just this contract beast. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang was on her way out, Tan Lihan passed by Bailey Hongzhuang and said some harsh words unhappily. "Instead of worrying about whether I can persevere, you should worry about yourself." Bailey Hongzhuang sneered. Tan Lihan snorted coldly and left. Xia Jiqing and the others came to Bailey Hongzhuang's side. After seeing Tan Lihan leave angrily, everyone was confused. "Hongzhuang, what did that woman say?" Xia Jiqing frowned. Today, they were all on the viewing platform and were quite a distance away from Bailey Hongzhuang, so they had no idea what had happened. Bailey Hongzhuang waved her hand. "It's nothing. Don't worry about it." Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang's attitude, Xia Jiqing and the others had already understood in their hearts. However, with the identity and ability of Bailey Hongzhuang, there was indeed nothing to worry about. "White Lion, I haven't seen you in a while. I didn't expect you to be so powerful." Xia Jiqing touched Baishir's head. Baishir was really majestic now, and his fighting strength was really terrifying. In comparison, there was a huge gap between her Xiaofeng and him. Baishir rubbed his head against Xia Jiqing. He was still very familiar with Xia Jiqing, who had watched him grow up. Your Wind Spirit Tiger's strength has also increased very quickly. Chapter 2234. The next day, the sky was clear and the wind was cool. The martial arts field was bustling with activity early in the morning. Many disciples had started betting on who would win. The odds were adjusted according to the disciple's strength. If the disciple was strong, the odds would be low. If the disciple was weak, the odds would be much higher. However, for the strongest disciples of the 4 branch palaces, this bet was not set up. This was because there was no suspense in their victory. Unless 2 of the strongest disciples of the 2 branch palaces clashed, there would be a different bet. Bailey Hongzhuang had checked her odds before the competition. She did not expect her odds to be in the middle. It seemed that everyone was optimistic about Baishir's strength. Just like the first day, Bailey Hongzhuang looked at the number she had drawn, number 3. "I didn't expect to appear so early this time." Bailey Hongzhuang sighed. This was good. After the competition ended, she could return to her sleeping quarters to rest. It seemed like only one day's time, but her strength would increase again. Yi Chenyu was still sitting beside Bailey Hongzhuang. After yesterday's competition, Bailey Hongzhuang already knew that Yi Chenyu was very strong. If she guessed correctly, Yi Chenyu would most likely enter the finals. "Junior Sister Bailey, your opponent today is White Tiger Palace's Guo Xiaoyan. Her strength belongs to the middle level of White Tiger Palace. Her cultivation is around the 2nd level of Green Realm. She has more battle experience than LV Zhengyang. She is not easy to deal with," Yi Chenyu explained to Bailey Hongzhuang after seeing the number in Bailey Hongzhuang's hand. Compared to yesterday's preliminary round, it was harder to rely on luck in the 2nd round. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. Green Realm Level 2. This cultivation was already very strong. The further one cultivated, the greater the difference between each level. "Thank you for the reminder, Senior Brother Yi. I will be careful." Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. The 3rd match, White Tiger Hall's Guo Xiaoyan versus Vermilion Bird Hall's Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang quickly walked up to the high platform as soon as the referee finished speaking. At the same time, Guo Xiaoyan was already standing in front of Bailey Hongzhuang. The two women, standing opposite each other, immediately attracted the interested gazes of many disciples. Among the disciples who were participating in the finals, there were very few female disciples. The collision between these two female disciples was even rarer. "Begin," said the judge without hesitation. Then, he left the fighting ring. Guo Xiaoyan stared at Bailey Hongzhuang. The elemental energy of a level 2 Green Realm warrior burst out in an instant, filling the entire sky with a sense of suppression. Guo Xiaoyan is already at Green Realm level 2. Even if Bailey Hongzhuang's contracted beast comes out, I'm afraid it won't be easy to win. The martial skills mastered by cultivators are much stronger than those of monsters. Bailey Hongzhuang will definitely lose this match. I also bet that Bailey Hongzhuang will win. I didn't expect her opponent to be Guo Xiaoyan. Some of the cultivators who had bet on Bailey Hongzhuang began to complain. This bet was all about cultivation resources. If they lost, it would not be an ordinary loss. In contrast, Xia Jiqing and the others who bet on Bailey Hongzhuang were not worried at all. Chapter 2235. The large fist enlarged in Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes. Bailey Hongzhuang was not flustered as she raised her right fist to meet the attack. When the crowd saw that Bailey Hongzhuang had not allowed Baishir to make a move and had instead met Guo Xiaoyan's fist head-on, their eyes simultaneously filled with shock. Guo Xiaoyan's power had always been on the list in the White Tiger Palace. Bailey Hongzhuang was only a pill master. Was she not asking for trouble by doing this? When Guo Xiaoyan saw Bailey Hongzhuang's actions, a smile appeared in her eyes. She had thought that she would need to spend some time to deal with Bailey Hongzhuang's contracted beast. She never thought that Bailey Hongzhuang would have no intention of letting her contracted beast attack, and instead wanted to meet force with force. In this way, the competition would end very quickly. Bang! The two fists collided with a loud bang, and energy ripples spread outwards. However, contrary to the crowd's expectations of Bailey Hongzhuang being defeated, Bailey Hongzhuang remained standing on the same spot. Her expression was calm, and she did not look injured at all. Guo Xiaoyan stared at Bailey Hongzhuang in shock. Based on the power that had been transmitted from her fist, Bailey Hongzhuang was not the least bit inferior to her. Could it be that Bailey Hongzhuang was also a powerful cultivator? When this thought appeared in Guo Xiaoyan's mind, she felt that it was rather inconceivable. How could Bailey Hongzhuang's cultivation not be any weaker than hers? Even if Bailey Hongzhuang was not a pill master, she was still a new disciple. Bailey Hongzhuang did not give Guo Xiaoyan the chance to think. She rose to her feet once again, and her sharp fists exploded towards Guo Xiaoyan like lightning. Bang, bang, bang. The two figures flew through the air, and the wind from their fists was like thunder. In a short moment, they had exchanged more than 10 blows. When the two separated once again, Guo Xiaoyan's expression had turned extremely ugly. Her hands couldn't help but tremble. At this moment, she no longer doubted Bailey Hongzhuang's strength. This was because not only was Bailey Hongzhuang not weaker than her, she was even stronger. I didn't expect. I underestimated you. Guo Xiaoyan stared at Bailey Hongzhuang. She had never treated Bailey Hongzhuang as her opponent. Now, it seemed that she had underestimated her opponent. It's good that you don't underestimate him now. After Bailey Hongzhuang moved her muscles and bones, she felt a lot more comfortable. The demonic beasts in the desert world were all abnormally strong. In the process of cultivating in the desert world, her strength could be said to have increased rapidly. She had to fight with those monstrous demonic beasts almost every day. She hadn't fought for the past 2 days, so she wasn't used to it. The onlookers were completely dumbfounded when they saw that Bailey Hongzhuang's strength was actually on par with Guo Xiaoyan's. Isn't Bailey Hongzhuang an alchemist? Why is she so strong as well? A new disciple who has already reached level 2 of the Green Realm. We can disembowel ourselves at any moment. It's a slap in the face. How would we have any dignity left? Since you're not weak, then I won't hold back. Guo Xiaoyan's voice was cold. Even though Bailey Hongzhuang's strength had exceeded her expectations, she still didn't think that Bailey Hongzhuang would be a match for her. Please. Bailey Hongzhuang's expression was calm. Even at this moment, she still looked as calm as ever. Ding! Chapter 2236. Bailey Hongzhuang raised her hand, and the glass sword immediately appeared in her hand. Azure Spirit Sword Technique. Guo Xiaoyan shouted coldly. The essence energy in her body instantly surged into the sharp sword in her hand, and a resplendent light emerged from the sword. Mystic Glass Sword. Bailey Hongzhuang's movements were not slow at all. She flipped her hands and condensed a seal, while the glass sword stood upright in the air. At this moment, everyone only felt that the essence energy in the air was frantically rioting. Two terrifying auras swept out with the two as the center. In the air, two enormous swords quietly condensed, mixed with a frightening fluctuation. Bang! Monstrous elemental energy surged. Two sharp swords that were over 30 meters long tore through the sky with extreme violence. Then, under everyone's shocked gazes, they collided with a loud bang. At the moment of impact, a thunderous sound resounded through the sky, and an extremely violent energy swept out. Fortunately, the Tiangang sect's fighting stage had its own array. No matter how shocking the battle fluctuations on the fighting stage were, it would not affect the disciples and the spectators' stands in the slightest. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Bailey Hongzhuang's figure rapidly retreated. With a wave of her sleeves, she removed all the energy in her body. Guo Xiaoyan similarly retreated to the other side of the fighting stage. Looking at the two attacks that constantly corroded each other in the air, her eyes were gloomy and complicated. Bailey Hongzhuang's strength exceeded her expectations. Looking at Bailey Hongzhuang's calm and composed appearance until now, she felt increasingly uneasy in her heart. Bang! Another earth-shattering bang sounded. The two attacks turned into smoke and dissipated into thin air. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at the mystic glass sword's effect and could not help but sigh. The Tiangang sect's disciples were indeed very strong. She actually did not achieve much effect. Guo Xiaoyan's face had an additional trace of paleness. Unless one looked carefully, one would not notice it. As a long-established expert of the White Tiger Hall, she actually fell into a disadvantage in the hands of a new disciple today. This was something that Guo Xiaoyan felt was simply impossible. If they were defeated by Bailey Hongzhuang's hands, they would really lose face. I didn't expect Bailey Hongzhuang to be so capable. Maybe I won't lose the bet and will even make a fortune. Bailey Hongzhuang really hid her strength well. Yesterday, when I asked the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's disciples, they said that Bailey Hongzhuang completely relied on the strength of her contracted beast. Now, it seems that they were just talking nonsense. I've also heard this from Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's Tan Lihan. Why is she spouting such nonsense? After a short collision, many disciples had already changed their direction. At the very least, the outcome of this competition was still uncertain. In the competition area, Tan Lihan's face had already turned purple. The strength that Bailey Hongzhuang had displayed today was truly a slap to her face. However, her heart was filled with disbelief. Normally, she had never heard of Bailey Hongzhuang's strength. Bailey Hongzhuang's ranking on the Pillar of Fame was also abnormally poor. She did not expect Bailey Hongzhuang's schemes to be so deep. She had purposely set up a trap to make people overlook her strength. With Bailey Hongzhuang's strength in addition to her contracted beast strength, her battle strength was really not weak. Why don't we end this quickly and decide the victor in one move? Guo Xiaoyan stared at Bailey Hongzhuang. At this moment, the pressure in her heart was incomparably great. If this continued, the only one who would be affected would be her. It looked like she had no choice but to use her trump card. Chapter 2237. In the next moment, Bailey Hongzhuang's hand seals swiftly flipped over. Vigorous yuan power whizzed out from her body, and a terrifying aura quietly appeared. Guo Xiaoyan had begun her actions almost at the same time as Bailey Hongzhuang. She knew very well that it would not be easy for her to enter the finals based on her abilities. However, she felt that she still had a good chance of entering the third round of the preliminary round. As long as she entered the third round, her abilities would be acknowledged by the Palace Master, and her future development would be smoother. After all, the top 20 in the entire Tiangang sect would be the top 5 in the Branch Palace. This had always been the goal that she had been striving for. When she saw that her opponent was Bailey Hongzhuang, she felt that her luck was very good and she would definitely be able to enter the third round. However, the situation before her eyes was very different from what she had imagined. If she were to be defeated by Bailey Hongzhuang, it would be better for her to be defeated by an expert who had been famous for a long time. Now, Guo Xiaoyan only felt that she had drawn the worst draw possible. Infernal Divine Palm. Guo Xiaoyan cried out loudly. The yuan power in her body whizzed wildly, and almost all of it surged into the martial skill. The crowd could only feel a wave of energy in midair. Soon after, a gigantic yuan power palm slowly appeared from the clouds. A terrifying and enormous energy spread out from the infernal divine palm, causing everyone's heart to palpitate and panic. After this martial skill appeared, Guo Xiaoyan's aura withered a little, and her face was also dyed with a touch of paleness. Looking at Guo Xiaoyan's performance, the crowd understood that this was Guo Xiaoyan's trump card. Once she had unleashed it, she would not be able to unleash any more powerful moves. Instantly, the crowd's eyes lit up. It seems that once this martial skill had clashed, the result of this round would be known. Sacred Green Flame Palm. Bailey Hongzhuang cried out coldly. Soon after, a gigantic palm, flickering with green flames, slowly appeared in midair. The two gigantic palms faced each other in midair from a distance. Both of them were filled with an extremely violent fluctuation, causing one to tremble with fear. If that's the case, then you'll definitely lose this competition. Guo Xiaoyan looked at the green palm in the air. Although the two palms looked similar, she could feel that her infernal divine palm was much stronger than Bailey Hongzhuang's azure flame sacred palm. Thinking of this, Guo Xiaoyan couldn't help but feel relaxed, as long as she could obtain victory. So what if she had to expend a little more effort? You've finished executing your martial skill, but mine hasn't. As Bailey Hongzhuang's voice fell, her hand seal quietly changed. In the next moment, under everyone's astonished gaze, the green palm in the air rapidly shrank. With Bailey Hongzhuang's current strength, using the Azure Flame Sacred Palm was no longer as difficult as before. Instead, it was a very smooth and simple matter. As the green palm shrank, its aura and flames rapidly increased. The aura it emitted was more than twice as strong as before. Guo Xiaoyan's pupils shrank as a thick sense of shock rose in her eyes. Bailey Hongzhuang's martial skill can actually change in this way. Most importantly, the outcome of this battle would be different. Let's end this competition. Chapter 2238. Boom! Infernal Divine Palm and Sacred Green Flame Palm collided with each other in front of everyone's shocked eyes. A thunderous sound from the ninth heaven reverberated, and it was so loud that even the deaf could hear it. An exceptionally terrifying yuan energy storm formed in the air. Two bursts of energy swept across wildly before exploding in midair. Boom, boom, boom. The sound of the explosion continued to reverberate, and the spectating disciples could not help but use their yuan energy to protect their ears. Otherwise, immersing themselves in such sounds might cause them to lose their sense of hearing. The array on the tournament stage had been activated immediately, forming a pale golden protective shield. The protective shield completely isolated the yuan energy ripples, preventing it from leaking out and affecting the spectating disciples. However, from the violent fluctuations of the protective shield, one could tell just how terrifying the energy on the tournament stage was. The spectating disciples were all dumbfounded. Even in all the matches that they had watched yesterday, there was nothing as exciting as this. My God, Guo Xiaoyan has already used her trump card. I wonder if Bailey Hongzhuang can withstand it? I feel that Bailey Hongzhuang's ability is stronger than Guo Xiaoyan's. Her contract beast has yet to make a move. If Bailey Hongzhuang allows her contract beast to make a move, Guo Xiaoyan will definitely lose. This Bailey Hongzhuang is really a genius. Not only is she a genius alchemist, she's also a genius cultivator. Her age is younger than Guo Xiaoyan by a few years. If she's the same age as Guo Xiaoyan, wouldn't she defeat Guo Xiaoyan in one move? At this moment, all the disciples' gazes towards Bailey Hongzhuang changed. This kind of Bailey Hongzhuang was already much stronger than the average disciple in Tiangang sect. Even Han Xiling could not be compared to Bailey Hongzhuang. You guys still say that Bailey Hongzhuang is not worthy of young sect master. I feel that Bailey Hongzhuang is an absolute goddess. In the entire Tiangang sect, aside from Bailey Hongzhuang, who else is worthy of young sect master? Ever since the alchemist competition, Bailey Hongzhuang has gained many supporters in Tiangang sect. Now, after witnessing her performance on the tournament stage, everyone was filled with anticipation. After witnessing Bailey Hongzhuang's display of power, the medicine sect's disciples finally understood why Bailey Hongzhuang had chosen to stay in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. This was because her innate talent in cultivation was also extremely outstanding. Genius. At this moment, almost every disciple felt that Bailey Hongzhuang was a genius. Even if Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes, she was still a genius. She was still a genius. As long as she was given a few more years, Bailey Hongzhuang's strength would definitely be amazing. Inside the protective barrier, energy ripples swept out crazily. Red and green energy intertwined continuously, making it impossible for the audience to see the situation on the stage. This energy ripple is so terrifying. I wonder if Hongzhuang will be injured? A touch of worry appeared in Xia Jiqing's eyes. They were standing outside the protective shield and naturally were not affected in the slightest. However, the energy within the protective shield was enough to seriously injure people. Don't worry. With Hongzhuang's strength, this is definitely not a problem. Dongfang Yu's face was filled with a confident and brilliant smile. With his understanding of Bailey Hongzhuang would be able to handle this match with ease. This is not Bailey Hongzhuang's full strength. She will definitely win this match. Chapter 2239. Gue Jianyuan stood beside Shin Xiuhan and fixed his gaze on the stage. He smiled faintly and said, "Junior brother Shun, what do you think of junior sister Bailey's strength?" He had already noticed the conflict between Shin Xiuhan and Bailey Hongzhuang. Towards Bailey Hongzhuang, he was not envious of Bailey Hongzhuang like the others. Instead, he felt that Bailey Hongzhuang was an elegant and talented woman. Not to mention the first time he had spoken to Bailey Hongzhuang had been modest and polite. Even with the young lord's judgment, Bailey Hongzhuang was definitely not a seductive person. When Bailey Hongzhuang had tested her strength on the ranking pillar for the first time, she had already surpassed all the new disciples. Even some of the older disciples had been surpassed by Bailey Hongzhuang. To be able to reach such a cultivation at such a young age, it was impossible that she had not worked hard. Hearing Gue Jianyuan's words, Shin Xiuhan's expression remained cold. It's just a small trick. With such strength, it's easy to deal with. Haha, Gue Jianyuan chuckled. I feel that this is not all of junior sister Bailey's strength. When junior brother Shun was a new disciple, you also did not have the strength to participate in the competition of the four palaces. The moment he said that, Shin Xiuhan's expression turned ugly. Indeed, as Gue Jianyuan had said, when he first came to Tiangang sect, although the palace master and elders thought highly of him, as a new disciple, there was still a big gap between his strength and the older disciples. However, in the second competition of the four palaces, he had already performed extremely well. However, on this point, he was indeed not as good as Bailey Hongzhuang. Even if he did not want to admit it, it was a fact that everyone knew. Senior brother Gue, what do you mean? Shen Xiuhan turned to look at Gue Jianyuan with a cold look in his eyes. Gue Jianyuan smiled faintly. Junior brother Shun, you think too much. I just wanted to say that Bailey Hongzhuang is also a genius. With that, Gue Jianyuan returned to his seat and didn't intend to say anything more. Shen Xiuhan's face turned cold. In the entire Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, he feared no one except Gue Jianyuan. As the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's eldest senior brother, Gue Jianyuan's relationship with the disciples had always been very good. Furthermore, his reputation was very high. Not only that, Gue Jianyuan was also very strong and had a very good relationship with the elders and palace masters. This was something that even he couldn't compare to. Moreover, he felt that Gue Jianyuan might be hiding something. The strength he had displayed might not be his true strength. It was precisely because he always had a feeling of being unable to see through Gue Jianyuan that he had always been wary of him. As the dust on the martial arts stage gradually dissipated, everyone gradually saw the situation on the martial arts stage. However, when everyone saw the situation on the martial arts stage clearly, they could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. He saw Guo Xiaoyan standing on one side of the stage in a sorry state. Blood was flowing out from the corner of her mouth. Her breath was weak and her hair was messy. It was obvious that she was exhausted. As one of the top 10 in White Tiger Palace, she was actually in such a sorry state. It was very different from what everyone had imagined. When everyone's gaze shifted to Bailey Hongzhuang, their expressions became even more interesting. Chapter 2240. Such a stark contrast gave everyone an indescribable shock. For a time, everyone looked at this scene and did not make a sound for a long time. Originally, everyone thought that Bailey Hongzhuang was not Guo Xiaoyan's opponent at all, but now, Guo Xiaoyan had become like this, while Bailey Hongzhuang was safe and sound. Didn't this mean that Bailey Hongzhuang's strength was much stronger than Guo Xiaoyan's? This was a bit too incredible. Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, Bailey Hongzhuang wins. Under such circumstances, even the referee elder's reaction was sluggish for a moment, but he quickly reacted and announced the result of the competition. With the referee elder's voice falling, everyone recovered from the shock and looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with a sudden change in their eyes. Senior Guo, thank you for letting me win. Bailey Hongzhuang slowly bowed before walking down the stage. Guo Xiaoyan's appearance was extremely embarrassing, and her expression was extremely complicated. However, the touch of unwillingness in the depths of her eyes had disappeared. In this competition, she accepted her loss wholeheartedly. Dongfang Yu, Xia Jiqing, and the others' faces flashed with a happy smile. On one hand, they were happy for Bailey Hongzhuang's victory, and, on the other hand, they could get a lot of cultivation resources from this bet. This feeling was like they had received inside information before the competition. They had earned too much. Dibachen's face was filled with a faint smile. Although Bailey Hongzhuang's cultivation time was not as long as some disciples, her strength was already stronger than many of the disciples. He believed that with Hongzhuang's strength, it would not be a problem for her to enter the finals. It was just that the ranking in the finals could not be determined. After all, the strength of the top masters of the 4 major palaces was extremely powerful. After the end of the competition, Bailey Hongzhuang did not continue to watch the competition, but returned to her palace. She did not intend to spend the whole day here. Cultivating for one more day would increase her strength by a bit. What's more, her goal was never the competition between the 4 palaces, but the battle for the throne. Regarding Bailey Hongzhuang's departure, many disciples had noticed, but at this moment, everyone had already regarded Bailey Hongzhuang as a true master worthy of respect. After the second round of the preliminaries, there were only 20 disciples left out of the 40. These 20 disciples could be said to be the top strength of the 4 palaces. Bailey Hongzhuang cultivated in the desert world for 3 days, and then recovered her yuan qi in the cultivation room. When the sun rose, her essence, qi, and spirit had returned to their peak. Wife, your performance yesterday was very wonderful. After seeing Bailey Hongzhuang stop cultivating Didi Bachin laughed. Today is the third preliminary round. As long as you can pass today's round, you will be able to enter the finals. However, there is a high chance that you will encounter a strong opponent. The later the competition, the higher the probability of meeting a strong master. Once she met one of the four great masters, it would not be so easy to advance. He had confidence in Hong Zhuang's strength, but the four great masters were also extremely powerful. Bailey Hong Zhuang smiled faintly. Different situations call for different measures. If we really meet them, then we can only fight. Seeing Bailey Hong Zhuang so calm, Di Bachin smiled. My wife's luck has always been good. Even if we really meet, the outcome is still unknown. Chapter 2241. When Bailey Hong Zhuang arrived at the tournament arena once again, she discovered that the contestant area was much more spacious. Today, there were only 5 people left, so naturally, it was extremely spacious. On the contrary, the number of disciples on the spectator stand was increasing. Originally, there were still some disciples who did not come to watch the preliminary round. Now that it was nearing the end, the disciples all rushed over. Bailey Hong Zhuang glanced at the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall disciples in the competition area and discovered that the few people in front of her were all familiar faces. Gue Jianyuan, Shun Xiuhan, Tan Lihan, and Yi Chenyu, including her, with a final 5 people left in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Junior sister Bailey, you've come. Yi Chenyu took the initiative to greet Bailey Hong Zhuang when he saw her arrive. Bailey Hong Zhuang smiled slightly. Senior brother Yi, you've come really early. The moment she saw Yi Chenyu, Bailey Hong Zhuang had a new assessment of Yi Chenyu's strength in her heart. Yesterday, after the competition, she had left and did not pay attention to the situation of the other disciples' competition. Now that there were only 5 people left in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, the strength of these 5 people was really extremely strong. The moment Bailey Hong Zhuang appeared, Tan Lihan's gaze had already landed on her. Looking at Bailey Hong Zhuang, it could be said that she was getting more and more displeased. With her strength, to be able to last till this round was all thanks to her good luck in yesterday's draw. Today's preliminary round would most likely result in her being eliminated. Bailey Hong Zhuang naturally would not ignore Tan Lihan's gaze, especially after seeing Tan Lihan's indignant look. Bailey Hong Zhuang ridiculed. Oh, senior sister Tan, looks like your luck yesterday wasn't bad to actually be able to last till this round. If I didn't guess wrongly, the person you drew should be the existence at the bottom, right? Once those words were said, Tan Lihan's face instantly darkened. She did not expect that Bailey Hong Zhuang would actually take the initiative to provoke her today. How hateful. However, what Bailey Hong Zhuang said was the truth. Even if Tan Lihan wanted to object, she could not say any words to refute. Bailey Hong Zhuang looked at Tan Lihan's unyielding and helpless look as the corners of her lips could not help but curl up a little. I was just randomly guessing. Looking at senior sister Tan's expression, I guessed right. Listening to Bailey Hong Zhuang's words, Tan Lihan almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Bailey Hong Zhuang didn't know it all. Bailey Hong Zhuang, Tan Lihan's face, Bailey Hong Zhuang's, Lihan's, Bailey Hong Zhuang, Bailey Hong Zhuang's Hong Zhuang. Bailey Hong Zhuang sneered. When you slander me in front of so many people, why didn't you let yourself go too far? You Bailey Hong Zhuang's S. Bailey Hong Zhuang looked disdainfully at Tan Lihan, then sat down on her own seat. In the past, she was used to keeping a low profile and being kind to others in Tiangang sect. However, some people refused a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Since that was the case, there was no need for her to pretend to be kind. Deep down, she was not a very good person. After all, many people had died in her hands all these years. She was going to take part in the Battle of Zhuolu. The Battle of Zhuolu was a team competition. When the time came, she would most likely take part in the Battle of Zhuolu together with Shun Xiuhan and the rest. Rather than being questioned by this group of people during the Battle of Zhuolu, she might as well start the conflict right from the start. Chapter 2242. After Bailey Hongzhuang said these words, Tan Lihan's face turned red and white, but as Bailey Hongzhuang said, she really had no right to say such words. You relied on young sect master to get to where you are today. What I said is the truth. Tan Lihan retorted. This was something that all the disciples of Tiangang sect agreed on. She just said this in front of Bailey Hongzhuang. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang laughed instead of being angry, but her eyes became sharper. Suddenly, Bailey Hongzhuang changed the topic and said, Which eye of yours saw that I relied on young sect master to get to where I am today? Do you have evidence? Along the way, I have seen a lot of people like you. Seeing that others have strength, you are jealous. You have to find some reasons to prove that others have used some messy means to get to where they are now. It seems that if you don't find a reason like this, you will be unhappy. If you are really so strong, why don't you have some means? Since coming to Tiangang's sect, Bailey Hongzhuang had been suffering such criticism. She didn't care because the innocent would know that they were innocent, and because once others began to deceive themselves, even if you explained it, it was useless. However, she heard that Tan Lihan was talking about her on the surface, but at the same time, she also spread rumors in other places. She couldn't stand it anymore. Bailey Hongzhuang's words could be said to have an immediate effect. She directly picked out everything and went straight to the point, leaving no chance to cover it up. For a moment, Tan Lihan was also speechless. Evidence? She really didn't have it, but after knowing the relationship between Bailey Hongzhuang and young sect master, she already thought so. Yichen Yu and Gue Jianyuan had been smiling faintly as they watched the verbal confrontation between Bailey Hongzhuang and Tan Lihan. They usually saw Bailey Hongzhuang's polite and humble appearance. Today, they saw another side of Bailey Hongzhuang. This kind of Bailey Hongzhuang was very real, but it didn't make people feel disgusted. Compared to some people who pretended to be saints, Bailey Hongzhuang was much better. When Shun Xiuhan saw that Tan Lihan was at a loss for words, he couldn't help but frown. Junior Sister Bailey, do you dare to say that you didn't approach the young sect master because of his identity? He didn't want to talk about Bailey Hongzhuang, but Tan Lihan was speechless, so he had to speak up. Bailey Hongzhuang chuckled, and her smile became more brilliant and enchanting. Don't you know what the situation was when your young lord left Tiangang sect? As soon as he said this, Shun Xiuhan, Yi Chenyu, and the others' faces changed. If it wasn't for this, how could a woman from a small dynasty like me possibly know him? Don't think that everyone is as dirty as you. If you can think that way, it usually means that you are such a person. With that, Bailey Hongzhuang waited quietly for the competition to begin. At this point, there was no need to say more. Shun Xiuhan and the others' hearts were in a perilous situation. They had more or less heard some inside information about the young sect master leaving Tiangang sect. Even if the palace master and elders didn't give any confirmation, they still knew that those things weren't rumors. In that case, the situation was completely different from what they had imagined. Chapter 2243. Shun Xiuhan felt as if he had been slapped in the face. Facing Bailey Hongzhuang, he could no longer say the words he had said before. If Bailey Hongzhuang had accompanied the young sect master in that kind of situation, then the young sect master's love for Bailey Hongzhuang was not hard to understand. After all, this kind of woman was what every man looked forward to. Junior Sister Bailey, let's go up on stage and draw lots. Gue Jianyuan looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with a smile and said, All right. Bailey Hongzhuang immediately walked up to the high platform with Gue Jianyuan and the rest to draw their lots. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at the lot in her hand. Her opponent today was a disciple from the Black Tortoise Hall. His number was 5 and could be said to be in the middle. This competition between the 4 palaces was a competition of the strength of the disciples from the 4 palaces. Hence, disciples from their own palaces would not meet disciples from their own palaces. As for the results of this competition between the 4 palaces, it would be decided based on the number of disciples in the finals. After all, there were a total of 10 disciples in the finals. The 4 palaces could not divide them equally. If two palaces had the same number of disciples in the finals, it would be decided based on the highest ranking of the disciples. As of now, there were 6 people from the Azure Dragon Hall, 5 from the White Tiger Hall, 5 from the Vermilion Bird Hall, and 4 from the Black Tortoise Hall. Based on this situation, the Azure Dragon Hall was in an advantageous position. The Black Tortoise Hall was very likely to be in last place. The White Tiger Hall and the Vermilion Bird Hall were in the middle. As for the general ranking of the 4 palaces, it would be more or less known after the 3rd round of the preliminary competition. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at the Black Tortoise Hall disciple that she was matched against. It seemed that her luck was not bad, and she had not met the strongest disciple from the Black Tortoise Hall. When Yi Chenyu saw the lot that Bailey Hongzhuang had drawn, his expression could not help but change. Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang raised her eyebrows and asked, "Senior Brother Yi, is there a problem with the lot that I drew?" Hearing this, Yi Chenyu shook his head. "Your lot isn't bad. After all, you didn't meet the strongest person from the other 3 halls. However, you can't say that you were lucky because your opponent is ranked 2nd in the Martial Hall. He is also very strong. Yin Yuan, he's usually a very low-key person, and he doesn't reveal much of his strength. According to my judgment, Yin Yuan's strength is probably at Green Realm level 4 or even stronger." Now that they had entered the 3rd preliminary round of the competition of the 4 palaces, the opponents they would encounter were each stronger than the last. There was no hope of relying on luck anymore. They could only rely on their own strength. Green Realm level 4. Bailey Hongzhuang raised her eyebrows slightly. He was indeed a formidable opponent. "Junior Sister Bailey, you have to be careful in this match. I'm afraid you'll have to give it your all." The 2nd place of the Martial Arts Hall was no joke. "Thank you for your reminder, Senior Apprentice Brother Yi. I will pay attention to it." Although her opponent was extremely strong, Bailey Hongzhuang's expression was still calm, as usual. She was already prepared to meet such a strong cultivator. Seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang could still be so calm after knowing Yin Yuan's strength, Yi Chenyu could not help but be amazed. It seemed that Junior Sister Bailey's strength was really a mystery. He had some understanding of the strength of the famous disciples in the sect. However, Bailey Hongzhuang was an exception. Chapter 2244. In the 3rd round of the preliminaries, every match was extremely exciting. Other than the 4 great experts, almost every disciple had used all their skills. Because if they did not use all their strength at this time, they would not have the slightest bit of hope. When Bailey Hongzhuang noticed that Tan Lihan's opponent was the number 2 expert of the Azure Dragon Hall, she already knew that Tan Lihan would lose without a doubt. In reality, it was just as Bailey Hongzhuang thought. Tan Lihan did not even have the chance to use all her skills when she was forced off the stage. In response, Tan Lihan could only walk down the stage with a dejected face. She had already expected to lose this match, but she did not expect to lose so miserably. When she felt Bailey Hongzhuang's gaze on her, Tan Lihan coldly said, "Don't be so proud. Yin Yuan's strength is also very strong. I'm afraid that you will lose more miserably than me. Then I'm afraid that you will be disappointed." Bailey Hongzhuang shrugged her shoulders and still had an indifferent expression. "Umph." Tan Lihan puffed up her cheeks and sat down. Originally, she did not want to continue staying here after losing so much face. However, seeing Bailey Hongzhuang being so arrogant, she wanted to see how Bailey Hongzhuang would lose later. The 5th match, Vermilion Bird Hall's Bailey Hongzhuang versus Black Tortoise Hall's Yin Yuan. Following the announcement of Bailey Hongzhuang and Yin Yuan's names, there was a commotion in the spectators' stand. Bailey Hongzhuang's luck is not good today. She actually met Yin Yuan. She will lose for sure. Yin Yuan's temper is similar to Yin Bin's. Normally, no one would be willing to provoke him. Moreover, this guy does not have any tender feelings for the fairer sex. Bailey Hongzhuang is already a genius to be able to enter the 3rd round. Don't forget that she is a new disciple. On the martial arts stage, Bailey Hongzhuang listened to the whispers of the audience. Suddenly, she understood Yin Yuan a bit more. It seemed that Yin Yuhuan's strength was truly formidable. That was why there were so many disciples who thought highly of him. When Bailey Hongzhuang saw Yin Yuhuan, she couldn't help but sigh in her heart. This guy's name and appearance didn't match at all. Hearing the name Yin Yuhuan, one would think that this person was an imposing and handsome man. However, the man in front of them was clearly a burly man. Just by looking at his well-built body, one could tell how strong Yin Yuhuan's muscles were. For such a ferocious person to have such a refined name, there was a sense of incongruity. In fact, not only Bailey Hongzhuang felt this way, but the disciples of the entire Tiangang sect felt so. Begin. With the referee elder's command, Bailey Hongzhuang and Yin Yuhuan immediately entered a state of confrontation. Junior Sister Bailey, I've always admired you. As a genius alchemist, you've restored the dignity of Tiangang sect, and you're able to reach this step in cultivation. You're indeed a proud daughter of heaven. I don't want to hurt you. Why don't you withdraw from this competition? I'm such a boorish person. Once I start fighting, I won't be able to distinguish the severity of the situation. Yin Yuhuan scratched his head, and his expression revealed a bit of embarrassment. He had a bad habit. Once he started fighting, he would not recognize anyone. He admired Bailey Hongzhuang very much and didn't want to hurt her. Chapter 2245. Bailey Hongzhuang sized up Yin Yuhuan for a moment and already knew that Yin Yuhuan's words were sincere and did not have any other meaning. However, she had stayed in Tiangang sect for so long, and Yin Yuhuan was probably the most unique disciple she had seen. Not only Bailey Hongzhuang, but the disciples present were also taken aback after hearing Yin Yuhuan's words. Usually, Yin Yuhuan was someone who did not know how to be gentle with women. Who would have thought that in front of Bailey Hongzhuang, Yin Yuhuan would actually take the initiative to remind her? This was not in line with Yin Yuhuan's usual style. Thank you, senior brother Yin, for your reminder. I will be careful. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled faintly, but her words had already expressed her attitude very clearly. She understood that Yin Yuhuan was reminding her out of good intentions, but she would not give up on this competition so easily. Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang's firm attitude, Yin Yuhuan could only sigh. However, if it was anyone else, they would not give up so easily under such circumstances. Since junior sister Bailey has already made up her mind, then be careful. Following Yin Yuhuan's words, surging and powerful Yuan power almost instantly burst out from Yin Yuhuan's body. This kind of fluctuation far surpassed the ordinary disciples who were participating in the competition of the four halls. Feeling this kind of fluctuation, Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes narrowed, and her expression became more dignified. Just as Yi Chenyu had told her, Yin Yuhuan's strength had already reached Green Realm Level 4. Moreover, his aura was much stronger than an ordinary Green Realm Level 4 cultivator. It seemed that Yin Yuhuan's strength was indeed worthy of his reputation. No wonder he had warned her previously. However, her current strength was not weak either. In addition to her various trump cards, if they were to really cross swords, the outcome would not be known. One had to know that Bailey Hongzhuang's ability to fight beyond her level had always been good. In the next moment, Yin Yuhuan raised his right hand, and a golden long spear appeared in his hand. Yin Yuhuan's figure moved, and his figure suddenly swept out. The long spear in his hand danced out several golden spear flowers, which were incomparably swift and fierce, enveloping Bailey Hongzhuang's vital points. Ding ding! The spear flowers swept past, and just as they were about 3 meters away from Bailey Hongzhuang, the glass sword in her hand also shot out rays of sword light, colliding with the spear flowers with a loud bang. Immediately, sparks flew in all directions, and a berserk wind swept out from the point of contact. At the same time, Bailey Hongzhuang's speed was also extremely fast. With a flash of her shadow, she turned into a ray of white light and quickly approached Yin Yuhuan. The sharp sword in Bailey Hongzhuang's hand pierced out, aiming for Yin Yuhuan's vitals at a tricky angle. Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang's actions, Yin Yuhuan's eyes lit up. He pointed the spear in his hand at the ground and bent it at a strange angle. His body shot out and dodged Bailey Hongzhuang's attack. Ding, ding, ding. After Yin Yuhuan's body shot out, he quickly attacked Bailey Hongzhuang again, and a violent and fierce attack erupted in an instant. Bailey Hongzhuang was not afraid at all. Her sharp sword danced, and her figure was ethereal. The two figures intertwined like a whirlwind. The spear flowers and the sword light constantly collided, dazzling the eyes of the spectators. Seeing this scene, the disciples present could not help but be secretly speechless. Chapter 2246. At this moment, Yin Yuhuan's gaze towards Bailey Hongzhuang had changed. Previously, he had assumed that Bailey Hongzhuang's attainments in pill refinement were extremely shocking, and she still had a long way to go in terms of cultivation. However, based on the current situation, Bailey Hongzhuang's cultivation did not seem to be much weaker than his. If his judgment was correct, Bailey Hongzhuang was also a Green Realm 4th level cultivator. At this moment, he suddenly understood why Bailey Hongzhuang was able to remain unscathed when she was dealing with Guo Xiaoyan. That was because Bailey Hongzhuang had been concealing her cultivation from the start. Her powers were much stronger than Guo Xiaoyan's, so she was able to remain unscathed under that kind of attack. In a competition like the Battle of the Four Palaces, many cultivators would intentionally conceal their cultivation in order to lower their opponent's guard. Once the other party was underestimated, the other party would reveal many flaws. Furthermore, to a cultivator, no matter when, as long as they were able to conceal some of their trump cards, it would be good. If the other disciples were already familiar with their moves, then their safety would be much less guaranteed. Junior Sister Bailey, it seems that I have underestimated you. I never thought that your talent in cultivation would be so shocking. Unlike other cultivators, Yin Yuhuan admired Bailey Hongzhuang even more after witnessing Bailey Hongzhuang's powers. Bailey Hongzhuang was a true genius. Senior brother Yin, you flatter me. Since junior sister Bailey's powers are so great, then I don't have to hold back anymore. Junior sister, please receive my attack. Senior brother, please. Even though the battle between both parties was in full swing, the exchange between the two of them was extremely harmonious. Obviously, no matter who the final winner of this competition was, it would not affect their view of each other. In the next instant, Yin Yuhuan's expression became much more solemn. His hands slowly formed a strange seal. Following the change of his seal, the Yuan power that surged around his body suddenly started to boil. Following the change of the palm print, Bailey Hongzhuang discovered that behind Yin Yuhuan, a dark blue energy suddenly rose up, as if a huge ocean had appeared behind him. Seeing this scene, Bailey Hongzhuang's expression changed. Yin Yuhuan was using his true strength. Earth Tier Martial Skill. After seeing the energy emitted by this martial skill, Bailey Hongzhuang immediately judged the level of this martial skill with her sharp eyes. Earth Rank Martial Skills. Every martial skill was not simple. In the previous battles, most of the disciples were executing profound rank martial skills. Currently, only Yin Yuhuan was executing Earth Rank Martial Skills. After Yin Yuhuan executed the Earth Rank Martial Skill, the expressions of the disciples present changed abruptly. The might of an Earth Rank Martial Skill was much stronger than a profound rank martial skill. Jade Waves Torrential Heavens. This is the Earth Tier Martial Skill, Jade Waves Torrential Heavens. I never thought that senior brother Yin would actually be able to execute this move successfully. The might of an Earth Rank Martial Skill is much stronger than a profound rank martial skill. If Bailey Hongzhuang has not grasped an Earth Rank Martial Skill, then she will definitely lose this battle. Billowing Jade Waves is an extremely famous martial skill in the Black Martial Hall. However, there are very few disciples who are able to learn and grasp it. Senior brother Yin has improved a lot in this period of time. Chapter 2247. However, there are not many disciples who were able to learn Jade Waves. Earth rank martial skills were different from profound rank martial skills. The higher the rank of the martial skill, the more difficult it would be to cultivate it. The time it would take would also increase. Once an Earth rank martial skill was mastered, the cultivator's battle strength would greatly increase. When the Black Tortoise Hall Master, Gu Jingqing, saw that Yin Yuan had successfully executed Jade Waves, a gratified smile appeared on his face. As the second-ranked expert in the Black Tortoise Hall, Yin Yuan was also a cultivation maniac. Furthermore, his simple and honest character was completely different from the reserved and gloomy character of ordinary cultivators. It was easier for people to have a good impression of him. This kind of cultivator was one-track minded. However, when he cultivated, he was also very practical and would never take advantage of opportunities. It was because of this that Yin Yuan's cultivation was also very pure. He had the same temperament as Yin Bin, and he liked him very much. Hall Master Qin, it seems that Bailey Hongzhuang is in some danger this time. Gu Jingqing smiled and said, among the 4 Hall Masters, he had the closest relationship with Qin AI. They often joked around, and at this moment, he did not have any scruples. Hearing Gu Jingqing's words, Qin AI was silent for a moment. To be honest, he was also unable to determine the result of this competition. After all, he had never understood Bailey Hongzhuang's strength before this. Although Bailey Hongzhuang's performance so far had always given people a feeling of amazement, her opponent was Yin Yuan. The result was really hard to say. On one hand, the testing apparatus was based on the length of time a cultivator could last inside. On the other hand, it was based on the cultivator's age. Bailey Hongzhuang was evaluated as a heaven rank martial skill. This proved that her potential was absolutely shocking. As for Bailey Hongzhuang's current strength, Qin AI only felt that since Bailey Hongzhuang could last for such a long time in the apparatus, her strength should not be weak. Hall Master Gu, everything is not over yet. It's better not to make a judgment too early. Just as Qin AI was thinking about how to answer, Di Beichen's faint laughter had already sounded first. Hearing Di Beichen's words, Gu Jingqing and Qin AI could not help but be stunned. Their eyes were filled with astonishment. Young Sect Master had watched so many matches, but had never once expressed his opinion. Now that he had suddenly expressed his opinion, moreover, he thought highly of Bailey Hongzhuang, that had an extraordinary meaning. Young Sect Master and Bailey Hongzhuang were a pair. They didn't understand Bailey Hongzhuang's ability, but Young Sect Master definitely did. Now that Young Sect Master had said this, it proved that Bailey Hongzhuang's ability wasn't that simple. Even if Yin Yuan made a move, Bailey Hongzhuang might not necessarily lose. If that's really the case, then Bailey Hongzhuang is really amazing. Gu Jingqing smiled faintly and said, they had always had a good impression of Bailey Hongzhuang. At this moment, he naturally did not wish for Bailey Hongzhuang to fail. After Bailey Hongzhuang saw Yin Yuan displaying an Earth rank martial skill, her reaction was extremely fast. Instantly, a hand seal that no one had ever seen before condensed between Bailey Hongzhuang's hands. Lines of complicated seals emitted a fiery red light, bright and resplendent. At the same time, the crowd felt that with Bailey Hongzhuang as the center, the temperature around her rapidly rose. Following that, under the crowd's shocked gazes, a ball of fire suddenly formed behind Bailey Hongzhuang. Chapter 2248. Boom! After the sea of fire appeared, the air in the entire area seemed to have ignited, and the terrifying heat wave caused the space to distort. Most importantly, the sea of fire that Bailey Hongzhuang had condensed was not the slightest bit weaker than Yin Yuan's. After seeing this scene, the spectators' stand instantly exploded with sounds of inhaling cold air. Each and every disciple's eyes were filled with fear and passion. This level of martial skill was what they had yearned for even in their dreams. I never thought that Bailey Hongzhuang had also grasped an Earth rank martial skill. At her age, her cultivation talent is even more powerful than the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's Shun Xiuhan. I remember that this isn't the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's martial skill. How did Bailey Hongzhuang grasp it? This match is truly unexpected and exciting. At this moment, I really don't know who will emerge victorious in the end. Excited and fanatical gazes fell on Bailey Hongzhuang and Yin Yuhuan's bodies. The collision of two cultivators with such strength was the most attractive. Tan Lihan originally wanted to see Bailey Hongzhuang make a fool of herself. She never thought that not only did Bailey Hongzhuang not make a fool of herself, she had even stolen the limelight. Tan Lihan's face was ashen. As a Vermilion Bird Palace Hall disciple, she had the opportunity to learn the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's Earth rank martial skill. However, it was not an easy task to obtain the recognition of an Earth rank martial skill. At least, she had not managed to do so. Although she had always been envious of cultivators who had grasped Earth rank martial skills, the number of disciples who had failed was even higher. Hence, she had never felt that there was anything wrong with it. However, as a new disciple, Bailey Hongzhuang had actually grasped an Earth rank martial skill. This was a blatant slap to the face. Sea of Fire's Burial. Bailey Hongzhuang secretly shouted. The Sea of Fire's Burial was the first Earth rank martial skill that she had grasped in her previous life. Its power was extremely powerful. Back then, she had spent quite a bit of effort to cultivate the Sea of Fire's Burial. Fortunately, she had successfully learned it in the end and was able to use it with ease. In this life, she had saved a lot of time on cultivating martial skills. If not for this, she would still have a long way to go before she could reach her current level of cultivation. It was precisely because she could save time in these areas that she was able to catch up to Lan Qinyan. After all, she did not believe that Lan Qinyan was also a transmigrator like her. Yin Yuhuan's eyes lit up when he saw Bailey Hongzhuang's martial skill. He was even more surprised in his heart. Bailey Hongzhuang really hid her strength well. Junior sister Bailey, you've really hidden your strength well. No matter what the result of this competition is, I, Yin Yuhuan, am convinced by you. Yin Yuhuan admired the strong the most since he was born. With Bailey Hongzhuang's age, being able to cultivate to this level already proved that her talent was much stronger than his. If Bailey Hongzhuang was the same age as him, she would be even more powerful than the four great masters. If the four great masters were to be placed in front of her, they would be instantly turned into dregs. Hearing Yin Yuhuan's praise without the slightest bit of hypocrisy, Bailey Hongzhuang's lips curled into a smile. Senior brother Yin, I, Bailey Hongzhuang, also admire you. However, cultivators who had reached this stage were not ordinary people. Almost all of them were proud and arrogant people. It was not easy to get them to admit that someone was very strong. Chapter 2249. In the next moment, Bailey Hongzhuang and Yin Yuhuan had a tacit understanding, and the two attacks collided with each other in front of countless shocked eyes. Boom! The earth-shaking power burst out, and the sound of thunder from the ninth heaven resounded crazily, sweeping over the mountains of Tiangang's sect. The elemental energy storm quickly swept across, and the elemental energy in the air boiled. The terrifying collision between the blue ocean and the red sea of fire created a huge heat wave that seemed to be able to engulf everything. The sea of fire was constantly extinguished, and the ocean was constantly evaporated. The entire world seemed to be about to collapse under such an attack. It was terrifying and horrifying. The surrounding disciples looked at this scene in shock. This scene was more shocking than any of the previous matches they had seen. The nearby disciples had covered their ears with elemental energy, but their ears were still numb and painful. Under such a terrifying collision, the disciples only felt their scalps go numb. If they were to be under such an attack, they would have died without a corpse. I didn't expect junior sister Bailey's strength to have reached such a stage. It's really shocking. Yichen looked at this scene in shock. He had long known that Bailey Hongzhuang's strength was not what ordinary people had guessed. However, at this moment, when he saw Bailey Hongzhuang's true strength, he couldn't help but be shocked. Bailey Hongzhuang was only 19 years old. With such talent, even compared to the successors of some forces, she wasn't any weaker. With junior sister Bailey's ability to stand beside the young sect master, I'm afraid there's no one more suitable than her. Gue Jinyuan's eyes were filled with a complicated and deep light. One couldn't judge a book by its cover. Although Bailey Hongzhuang's appearance was shocking, she was definitely not a flower vase. Such a woman was the real pride of the heavens. In this world, the kind of person attracted the kind of people. If Bailey Hongzhuang wasn't so outstanding, how could she attract such an outstanding young sect master? When Shen Xiuhan saw this scene, he couldn't help but be moved. He didn't expect Bailey Hongzhuang's strength to be so much stronger than he had expected. Before this, he had purposely checked Bailey Hongzhuang's cultivation. However, Bailey Hongzhuang's entire body seemed to be wrapped in a cloud of fog, and he couldn't see through it. When the crowd saw the situation on the stage, the disciples couldn't help but gasp. This was because a huge pit had appeared on the stage, which had always been shockingly defensive. There were also burn marks around it. Such destructive power was shocking. The crowd's eyes quickly turned to look at Yin Yuhuan's body. His clothes were charred black, and he was in a sorry state. Drip, drip. Blood flowed down Yin Yuhuan's arm and slowly dripped to the ground, making a subtle sound that could not be ignored. It's not only the crowd's eyes, it also was beyond everyone's expectations. Of Bailey Hongzhuang's. When everyone saw Bailey Hongzhuang, their eyes couldn't help but change again. At this moment, Bailey Hongzhuang's hair was a bit more moist, a bit less elegant. On her white robe, there were a few enchanting blossoms of blood, revealing a bit of desolate beauty. Bailey Hongzhuang's face was pale, but her eyes were still bright. Chapter 2250. When the spectating disciples saw that Yin Yuhuan and Bailey Hongzhuang were still able to look at each other and smile despite being injured, their faces were filled with doubt. They couldn't understand the attitude of Bailey Hongzhuang and Yin Yuhuan. What's going on? Who won? Could it be a draw? A disciple couldn't help but ask. It was obvious that both Bailey Hongzhuang and Yin Yuhuan were injured, but it was impossible to tell who won. The referee elder hasn't announced the result yet. It should be because it hasn't been decided yet. After seeing this scene, Gue Jinyuan's lips slowly curved into a smile. Junior sister Bailey and junior brother Yin are in love with each other. As far as cultivators were concerned, many of them were friends that were forged through fighting. This kind of friendship was inexplicable compared to ordinary friendship, but it was unexpectedly trustworthy. Junior sister Bailey's performance in the Battle of the Four Palaces this time could be said to be shocking. If my judgment isn't wrong, junior sister Bailey shouldn't be 20 years old yet. Yi Chenyu sighed. Gue Jinyuan nodded. Less than 20 years old and already in the 4th level of the Green Realm. This strength is somewhat shocking. Junior sister Bailey is not an ordinary person. In the future, her achievements will be above us. Gue Jianyuan smiled faintly. Following Gue Jianyuan and Yi Chenyu's conversation, Shen Xiuhan and Tan Lihan's faces became very ugly. Based on the strength that Bailey Hongzhuang had displayed, their previous ridicule could be said to be a slap in the face. Junior sister Bailey, if you don't have any questions, how about we continue the competition? Yin Yuhuan smiled brightly. In the previous confrontation, they were indeed injured. However, their fighting strength didn't completely dissipate because of these injuries. On the contrary, they still had the strength to fight. Under such circumstances, no one was willing to admit defeat. Therefore, there was only one way to continue the competition. All right, Bailey Hongzhuang's pale face blossomed into a flower-like smile. It was a bit less bright and beautiful, but it was also a bit more poignant, but it was especially provocative. In the next moment, before the crowd could even react, Bailey Hongzhuang and Yin Yuhuan had already entered the battle once again. Yin Yuhuan's body surged with elemental energy. A monstrous amount of elemental energy whizzed out from his dantian and gathered in his hands. As he flipped his hands, Yin Yuhuan's expression was solemn. Bailey Hongzhuang's strength had exceeded his expectations. If he didn't use his trump card, he might lose to Bailey Hongzhuang. He admired Bailey Hongzhuang, but he didn't want to give up the opportunity to enter the battle for the throne. He had to win this competition. To win this competition. At this moment, a huge crater had appeared in the middle of the stage. Only the sides of the stage were still standing. Everyone could imagine what sort of situation would occur on the martial competition platform if another wave of attacks from these two people appeared. Following Yin Yuhuan's hand seal, an elemental energy fluctuation that wasn't any weaker than the blue waves instantly spread out. It was the same blue energy. However, it was deeper than the blue energy from before. Chapter 2251. After sensing the aura around Yin Yuhuan's body, Gu Jingqing's expression suddenly changed. He looked at Yin Yuhuan with a hint of shock. The four hall master's gazes also landed on Yin Yuhuan. Qin AI couldn't help but ask, Hall Master Gu, Yin Yuhuan has already learned this move? The astonishment in Gu Jingqing's eyes didn't dissipate. He only said, I also don't know when he learned it. The four hall masters looked at each other. It seemed that the disciples had spent a lot of effort to obtain a spot in the Battle of Zhuolu. In the past, the Battle of the Four Halls had never been so exciting. These fellows were all people who wouldn't use their full strength without any benefits. They would only use their full strength at a time like this. Hall Master Qin, it seems that Bailey Hongzhuang is in danger this time. Azure Dragon Hall Master Yin Kaiqing said slowly. Qin AI smiled faintly. His expression didn't reveal any emotions. Let's wait and see. With Bailey Hongzhuang's age, it's already very shocking that she could reach this step. Yin Kaiqing and the other two nodded. They had to admit this point. Skies swallowing jade waves. Yin Yuhuan shouted coldly. The terrifying blue ocean formed behind him once again. The dark blue energy emitted a shocking fluctuation. Compared to the previous sky swallowing jade waves, the might of this sky swallowing jade waves was even more terrifying. At this moment, the energy was dark blue and was almost black. It was like a tsunami, surging and surging. It was as if a huge wave could completely drown a person. After seeing Yin Yuhuan's martial skill, Bailey Hongzhuang's expression couldn't help but change. She didn't expect the sky-swallowing jade waves to have a second stage. Its might was much stronger than before. If she didn't deal with it carefully, she would be seriously injured. When the disciples of the Big Dipper sect saw Yin Yuhuan use this move, they didn't know what to say. It said that only Yin Bin mastered the sky, swallowing jade waves of black tortoise hull. I didn't expect Yin Yuhuan to have learned it too. His strength is really shocking. Bailey Hongzhuang will definitely lose now. He even used the sky, swallowing jade waves. Yin Yuhuan's ranking in Tiangang sect will rise again. Isn't it obvious? Once this jade wave devours the heavens is unleashed, there aren't many people in the entire Heavenly Dipper sect that are Yin Yuhuan's opponent. Almost at the moment when Yin Yuhuan displayed the jade wave's monstrous heavens, the wind completely tilted towards Yin Yuhuan. Junior Sister Bailey, thank you for letting me win. Yin Yuhuan grinned, revealing a row of white and neat teeth. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang suddenly said, Senior Brother Yin, it's still too early to determine the outcome. In the next moment, under the astonished gazes of everyone, Bailey Hongzhuang's expression turned serious. At the same time, a dense blood aura erupted from Bailey Hongzhuang's body. Then, a shocking pillar of blood shot up into the sky and enveloped Bailey Hongzhuang. At the same time, everyone felt a change in the air pressure. A kind of oppressive pressure spread rapidly with Bailey Hongzhuang as the center. A faint smell of blood wafted into everyone's nostrils. Everyone's eyes were locked onto the shocking pillar of blood. They didn't see Bailey Hongzhuang use any method. Why would such a pillar of blood appear out of nowhere? Chapter 2252. What kind of martial technique is Bailey Hongzhuang using? The pressure is so powerful. A disciple could not help but exclaim, I don't know. I've never seen such a martial technique before. Bailey Hongzhuang doesn't seem to have cultivated the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's secret techniques. This pressure is even more shocking than Yin Yuhuan's martial technique. Look, even Yin Yuhuan's heaven-swallowing jade waves is being suppressed. Following the emergence of this blood pillar, half of the sky above the battling platform was dyed blood red. Yin Yuhuan stared blankly at the scene, and his mind was filled with doubts. He could acutely sense that the moment Bailey Hongzhuang used the blood pillar, the Yuan power in his body was being suppressed. Not only that, but the power of the heaven-swallowing jade waves was also being suppressed. It was as if his cultivation had been suppressed to the point that he could not unleash his full strength. This was the first time he had seen such a martial technique. Before he had seen it, he had never known that such a martial technique existed. If he could master this move, it would be a great weapon in this situation where one side was weak and the other side was strong. What is Bailey Hongzhuang using? Tan Lihan couldn't help but ask Shen Xiuhan, who was standing at the side. Such a martial technique gave people a feeling of shock just by looking at it. If she had not seen it with her own eyes, she would find it hard to believe that it was Bailey Hongzhuang who had used it. Shen Xiuhan's gaze was sharp as he stared at the blood aura that filled the sky. A possibility slowly surfaced in his mind. However, when he thought of this possibility, even he felt that it was unbelievable. Shen Xiuhan's gaze then shifted to Di Beichen. The moment he saw Di Beichen, he suddenly felt that everything might be true. Blood Aura Field. Junior sister Bailey has actually mastered the Blood Aura Field. Yi Qinyu's voice became sharper. This news was more shocking than any other news he had heard before. To many people, the Bloodground Abyss was a place where evil demons gathered. However, to cultivators like them, it was a good place to train. The most valuable thing in the Bloodgrave Abyss was the Blood Aura Field. Once one obtained the Blood Aura Field, it was equivalent to having an extremely advantageous skill. Until now, everyone only knew that the young sect master had obtained the inheritance of the Blood Aura Field. Among the cultivators of Tiangang sect, there were also many people who tried to break through the Bloodchi Tower, but in the end, they all returned in defeat. Unless one was a rare genius, it was impossible to reach the end of such an inheritance. Back then, when the young sect master had obtained the inheritance of the Bloodchi Field, it had shocked everyone in the Shengxian continent. Many outstanding disciples had gone to the Bloodgrave Abyss, but the young sect master was the only one who had succeeded. Just this point alone was enough to prove the young sect master's genius status. However, Bailey Hongzhuang had also obtained the inheritance of the Bloodchi Tower. Didn't this mean that Bailey Hongzhuang's talent was also incomparable to many cultivators? You really can't judge a book by its cover. Junior sister Bailey has so many trump cards, yet she still allows others to mock her. She is really broad-minded. Gue Jianyuan laughed and shook his head. Any genius cultivator could not stand being looked down upon by others. Chapter 2253. Before Bailey Hongzhuang displayed her strength, all the disciples thought that Bailey Hongzhuang had gotten the chance to participate by taking the back door. Tan Lihan was even more excessive. She mocked Bailey Hongzhuang in front of everyone and put Bailey Hongzhuang in such an awkward situation. However, Bailey Hongzhuang did not say anything from the beginning to the end. Even when someone said that she got in through the back door, she directly admitted it. Now, it seemed that after Bailey Hongzhuang displayed her true strength, it was really a slap in the face. Junior sister Bailey should be too lazy to care about it. Yi Qingyu smiled faintly. With Bailey Hongzhuang's current position in Tiangang sect, her backing was stronger than any other disciple. If Bailey Hongzhuang took it seriously, who could fight against Bailey Hongzhuang? As a disciple of Tiangang sect, Tan Lihan naturally knew how powerful the blood aura field was. At this moment, after hearing Gue Jianyuan and Yi Qinyu's conversation, her expression was extremely ugly. She did not even dare to think about the existence of the blood aura field. However, Bailey Hongzhuang was actually able to obtain such an inheritance. This gap, Palace Master Qin, Bailey Hongzhuang actually obtained the blood aura field. Gu Jingqin could not help but be stunned after seeing this scene. They had seen this scene from Di Baichen before. Therefore, they had already determined at the moment they saw it. Qin AI was also a little stunned. He really didn't know about this. Although Bailey Hongzhuang was a disciple of Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, he did not have the slightest understanding of Bailey Hongzhuang's strength. He did not even know when Bailey Hongzhuang went to the blood aura field. No wonder Bailey Hongzhuang was able to obtain first place in the assessment competition. She must have already obtained the blood aura field before participating in the assessment competition. The Azure Dragon Hall Master, Yin Kaicheng, quickly analyzed the situation. Obtaining the blood chi field required a certain level of cultivation. If Bailey Hongzhuang went to the bloody ground abyss after coming to the Tiangang sect, then there was no possibility of obtaining the blood chi field. As Yin Kaicheng's voice sounded, Qin AI and the rest nodded. Previously, they had been so surprised that they did not understand this point. Now, after Yin Kaicheng's reminder, they also understood. First place in the assessment competition. It's not an undeserved reputation. No wonder Limitless Palace tried so hard to recruit Bailey Hongzhuang. The Four Temple Masters sighed and smiled. Now it seemed that Bailey Hongzhuang was even more talented in cultivation than Han Xiling. Bailey Hongzhuang's figure slowly appeared in everyone's line of sight after the blood aura field was displayed. Her white robe was already stained with the color of blood. Her pair of blood-red eyes were like top-grade gems. They were sparkling and translucent, revealing an enchanting and unbridled beauty. Under the contrast of the bright red, Bailey Hongzhuang's pale face was even more enchanting. She was like a demon in the dark night. One look was enough to make people yearn for her. This was a face that was impeccable no matter how one looked at it. Heavy makeup was always appropriate. Compared to Bailey Hongzhuang's usual cold elegance, the charming Bailey Hongzhuang gave people a sense of shock. Towering Heaven Devil Lotus. As Bailey Hongzhuang's voice sounded, a huge and shocking devil lotus gradually appeared in midair. A terrifying elemental energy wave spread out. Chapter 2254. Bang! Under the astonished gazes of countless people, the two attacks collided with a loud bang. It was a battle between bright red and deep blue. The entire sky seemed to be filled with these two colors, and even the sun's brilliance was blocked out. The space between heaven and earth seemed to distort in an instant. Bang, bang, bang. The sound of the explosion was incessant, and the yuan power in the air was boiling uncontrollably. However, what shocked the crowd was that the defensive barrier of the martial arts stage was already distorting under the impact of the two energies. It was as if it would shatter at any moment. Seeing this scene, the disciples who were closest to the martial arts stage could not help but retreat. Once the protective barrier was breached, they would be seriously injured. Kacha! Suddenly, a cracking sound was heard, and under the astonished gazes of the crowd, a large crack appeared on the indestructible defensive barrier. Kacha! Kacha! Heavens! The defensive barrier is about to shatter. Everyone retreat quickly. The defensive barrier is about to explode. It was not known which disciple took the lead to shout, but the rest of the disciples began to shout. The cracking sound continued to spread, and the disciples quickly felt the heat from the moist flames. All of the disciples quickly retreated and used their yuan power to protect themselves. Their strength could not be compared to Bailey Hongzhuang and Yin Yuan. If they were to be affected by this energy, they would not be able to cultivate properly for a long time. On the high platform, when the four palace masters saw that Bailey Hongzhuang and Yin Yuhuan's martial skills had actually shattered the defensive barrier, they immediately stood up. In the next moment, the four palace masters made their moves at the same time. The yuan power in their bodies spread out and replenished the energy of the defensive barrier. The martial arts stage's defensive barrier had always been very powerful. In the past competitions between the four palaces, there had been situations where it had broken. However, that was only possible during the finals. Now, it was only the third preliminary round, and the defensive barrier had already shattered under the attack. It was clear to see how powerful the disciples were this time. After the four palace masters made their moves, the defensive barrier was replenished with energy and gradually closed up, filling up the shattered area. Seeing this scene, the disciples below the spectators' stage finally relaxed. However, the yuan power ripples from before still caused them to have a lingering fear in their hearts. Too terrifying. Bailey Hongzhuang is definitely a famous person in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. For a new disciple to be able to reach this level, even in the entire Tiangang sect, there are only a few. Who said that Bailey Hongzhuang got in through the back door? If this kind of strength is obtained through the back door, then what are the others? Bailey Hongzhuang will be the goddess in my heart from now on. If anyone dares to slander her again, I will kill him. As soon as the disciple finished speaking, the group of cultivators also began to chime in one after another. Regardless of the final result of this competition, Bailey Hongzhuang had used her strength to conquer all of them. Perhaps it was because Bailey Hongzhuang was usually not calculative, but now that everyone knew the truth, they felt even more guilty towards Bailey Hongzhuang. Previously, they had really been gauging the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain. Their way of dealing with a woman was really too much. After Xia Jiqing and the others saw that all the disciples had changed their views, they couldn't help but feel happy for Bailey Hongzhuang. Chapter 2255. The four palace masters only retracted their hands when the energy fluctuations from the protective barrier gradually calmed down. Their eyes lit up. Just from the energy fluctuations, they were able to determine how powerful Bailey Hongzhuang and Yin Yuan were. After a moment, the protective barrier disappeared and the situation on the stage gradually became clear. However, the originally huge battle stage had now turned into ruins. It was full of potholes, and even the surrounding flat ground had disappeared. The fences were lying on the ground in disarray, and many of them were directly blown up. Looking at the terrifying destructive power, the disciples couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. This kind of destructive power was too frightening. Everyone's eyes searched through the ruins and finally found Bailey Hongzhuang and Yin Yuan's figures. At this moment, the two of them were standing in the ruins, and the crowd couldn't even see their figures clearly. They could only see the parts above their chest. This was because the ruins had already blocked their figures. Compared to before, Yin Yuan and Bailey Hongzhuang's figures were undoubtedly in a more sorry state. Yin Yuan's face was pale, and his hair was messy. His expression was filled with shock and astonishment, but most of it was disbelief. Bailey Hongzhuang's situation wasn't any better. However, her clothes were dyed red, and it was impossible to see her injuries. Who won and who lost? A disciple curiously asked. At this moment, it was impossible to determine the result just by looking at the two's expressions. I'm afraid it's still Yin Yuan. After all, Yin Yuan is very experienced and powerful. I think it should be Bailey Hongzhuang. Her blood chi field is very powerful. The referee elder leaped and appeared on top of the ruins. If he didn't take a closer look, it would be difficult to determine who the winner was. Junior Sister Bailey, I didn't expect you to be so powerful. Today is really a surprise, Yin Yuan slowly said. At this moment, he looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with admiration and a trace of admiration. This kind of cultivation talent was too shocking. Senior brother, Yin is very powerful. I was just lucky. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled faintly. Something like the blood aura field isn't something that can be obtained just by luck. I wholeheartedly accept my loss in this match. Yin Yuan clasped his hands towards Bailey Hongzhuang. He was truly convinced of his loss. Moreover, Bailey Hongzhuang's contracted beast had yet to make a move. This was only a competition on the martial arts stage. If it was a life and death battle, the person who would die in the end would definitely be him. Thank you for letting me win, senior brother Yin. The moment Yin Yuhuan admitted his failure, a burst of exclamations broke out from the spectator stands. Oh my god, senior brother Yin actually failed. Doesn't that mean Bailey Hongzhuang's strength is second only to the four great masters? This news is too explosive. Doesn't that mean that Bailey Hongzhuang has entered the finals? A new disciple can participate in the Battle of the Deer. This is too rare. In a split second, fiery and envious gazes landed on Bailey Hongzhuang. Regardless of whether Bailey Hongzhuang could make a name for herself in the Battle of the Deer, just the fact that she could participate in the Battle of the Deer at her age was already a kind of glory. Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's Bailey Hongzhuang wins. The referee elder's voice rang out. Chapter 2256. Master, how is her body? Xiaohei quickly asked. Don't worry, I just consumed a lot of energy. I just need to rest for a while. There's no problem. As for the injuries, they were all superficial and would recover quickly. When she was cultivating in the desert world, she was almost always injured, and now she had already gotten used to it. Under such circumstances, her body's recovery speed had also improved. Not only that, but her ability to resist attacks had also become stronger. If she had suffered such injuries in the past, the situation would have been much worse than now. But for the current Bailey Hongzhuang, it was nothing. After Bailey Hongzhuang returned to the competition area, Gue Jianyuan and Yi Chenyu both greeted her. Junior sister Bailey, how are your injuries? Bailey Hongzhuang took out a healing pill and said, I'm fine. Gue Jianyuan and Yi Chenyu looked at her carefully. They saw that although Bailey Hongzhuang's face was pale, her mental state was excellent, so they were relieved. After such a battle, Bailey Hongzhuang's breath was not weak. It could be seen how strong Bailey Hongzhuang's combat power was. Tan Lihan had left at this moment. She really didn't want to face Bailey Hongzhuang again. That would be really embarrassing. Junior sister Bailey, tomorrow is the finals. You have consumed a lot of energy. It is better to go back and rest. Gue Jinyuan's voice was warm and full of concern. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. In that case, I will go back first. Two senior brothers, you can do it. Gue Jianyuan and Yi Chenyu chuckled. Junior sister, please rest assured. You have already contributed so much to the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. We will do our best to fight for resources for the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Bailey Hongzhuang slowly left the competition area. At the same time, Yin Yuhuan had also returned to the Black Tortoise Temple to rest. Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang leave, Xia Jiqing and the others also left the stands and sent Bailey Hongzhuang back. Until Bailey Hongzhuang went back, Xia Jiqing and the others continued to return to the stands to watch the next match. Now, the matches were getting more and more exciting, and the martial techniques of the cultivators were also getting more and more powerful. The more they watched, the more battle techniques they could learn, which would be of great help to them in the future. At night, Bailey Hongzhuang stopped cultivating after sensing Di Beichun's aura. At the same time, Di Beichun was already sitting beside her. Wife, how is your body recovering? At this moment, Bailey Hongzhuang's face was no longer pale. Instead, it was rosy again. During this period of time, Di Beichun had been cultivating with Bailey Hongzhuang, so he was very familiar with Bailey Hongzhuang's strength. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled elegantly. I'm fine now. My wife, your performance today really surprised the palace masters. Now that he recalled the expressions of several palace masters at that time, Di Beichun still found it very funny. I have never participated in any competition in the sect before, so it is normal for everyone to not know my strength. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled, then pulled Di Beichun's arm and asked, Beichun, what is the result of the competition of the 4 palace halls? From the moment the list of the finalists was decided, the ranking of the 4 palace halls was already set. However, she came back to rest first, so she didn't know the ranking. Chapter 2257. Following Di Beichen's words, Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes lit up. You mean our Vermilion Bird Palace Hall is number one? Although Di Beichen had only said, very good, based on Di Beichen's character, Bailey Hongzhuang immediately guessed the result. Di Beichen smiled and nodded. That's right, there's a huge reversal in this result. Palace Master Qin's smile is almost reaching behind his ears. Bailey Hongzhuang's smile gradually widened. Although she rarely stayed in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, as a member of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, she was extremely happy to see the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall achieve such a good result. Originally, the Azure Dragon Palace Hall had the best result. Who would have thought that the result would be reversed? Di Beichen chuckled. You are the biggest variable in this. Most of the practitioners knew how strong the disciples of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall were. They were also clear about the disciples who had entered the finals. However, no one had thought that Bailey Hongzhuang would be able to enter the finals. This caused a huge reversal in the situation. There were a total of 10 disciples who had entered the finals. In total, each palace hall should have 2.5 spots. The strength of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall had never been bad. This time, with the addition of Bailey Hongzhuang unexpectedly entering the finals, there was no need to say more about the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's result. How many people from the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall have entered the finals this time? Bailey Hongzhuang asked curiously. She was not very clear about Gue Jianyuan and Yi Qinyu's strength. However, she felt that they were very strong and had a high chance of entering the finals. However, if everyone had entered the finals, then the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's result would be terrifying. Shun Xiuhan, Gue Jianyuan, Yi Qinyu, and Yu. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes flashed with astonishment. The 4 of us have all entered the finals? Di Beichen nodded. That's right. Right now, the entire Vermilion Bird Palace Hall is flourishing. You've become the hero of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Because Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 had entered the finals, the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall became the first of the 4 palaces. In the following period of time, the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's cultivation resources were the most abundant. Therefore, the disciples of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall were naturally grateful to Bailey Hongzhuang and the others. I didn't expect that the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall disciples would take up half of the 10 people in the finals. What about the other 3 palaces? 3 from the Azure Dragon Palace, 2 from the White Tiger Palace. The Black Tortoise Palace is the worst. Originally, with Yin Yuhuan's strength, he should have been able to enter the finals. Who would have thought that you would appear out of nowhere and push him out? Therefore, the Black Tortoise Palace is left with only Yin Bin to enter the finals. Bailey Hongzhuang could not help but be speechless after learning about the situation in the Black Tortoise Hall. It seems that the fact that she had defeated Yin Yuhuan had made things worse for the Black Tortoise Palace Hall. Originally, the Black Tortoise Palace Hall would have been able to retain at least 2 of their spots and would not have been considered shameful. But now they had lost a great deal of face. Don't think too much about it. In every competition of the 4 palaces, there will always be the first and the last place. This is very normal. It will be fine after some time. As if he had seen through Bailey Hongzhuang's thoughts, Di Beichen spoke out to console her. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. It's all good news. The finals will begin tomorrow. Because of today's competition, most of the disciples have suffered some injuries. The Palace Master hopes that you will have more time to rest. Therefore, they have already drawn the lots for the finals for you. Chapter 2258. When Di Beichen mentioned the opponent, he suddenly paused. Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but ask curiously, what's wrong? Palace Master Qin may have been too happy earlier, so your luck wasn't too good during the draw. Your opponent is Shun Xiuhan, Di Beichen said slowly. Although the results of the Battle of the 4 Palaces had already been decided, it would be best if they could achieve a higher ranking in the finals. The finals were different from the preliminary round. It didn't mean that they couldn't draw opponents from the same palace, but everyone hoped to meet their opponents later in the draw. After all, The first round of the finals had already determined the top 5 and bottom 5. Once Bailey Hongzhuang and Shun Xiuhan met, it meant that one of them would not be able to enter the top 5. After hearing that her opponent was Shun Xiuhan, Bailey Hongzhuang smiled meaningfully. So my opponent is him. Bailey Hongzhuang's voice was gentle but implied sarcasm. I've long wanted to fight with him. Palace Master Qin's draw is not bad. Di Beichen naturally knew what had happened to Bailey Hongzhuang. Slander and ridicule would not harm Bailey Hongzhuang. Instead, it was Shun Xiuhan and the rest who had lost face. Just do your best. Don't risk your life. Di Beichen reminded. Shun Xiuhan was the #1 expert in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, and his reputation was not undeserved. From the moment Bailey Hongzhuang entered the finals, she had been completely rehabilitated. Even if she couldn't achieve a high ranking in the finals, it was definitely not something to be ignored. To deal with Shun Xiuhan, Bailey Hongzhuang would have plenty of opportunities in the future. There was no need to rush. If she was seriously injured because of this, it wouldn't be worth it. After all, their ultimate goal was to win the battle of the Divine Throne. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded. Don't worry, I know what to do. The next few matches had nothing to do with Bailey Hongzhuang, so Bailey Hongzhuang stayed in the house to cultivate. With the existence of the desert world, Bailey Hongzhuang's day was equivalent to 3.5 days for an ordinary person. Therefore, wasting a day was extremely not worth it. With Lan Xinyan's position in the Lan family, she didn't need to participate in any matches to easily obtain a place in the Battle of the Divine Throne. Lan Xinyan must be cultivating in seclusion in the family, so naturally, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't fall behind. Her cultivation time was originally shorter than Lan Xinyan's. Now, with the help of the Chaos Ring, she was able to catch up a little. In the battle of the heavenly competition, the competition's battle of the heavenly competition, almost all the disciples in the finals was battle of the competition battle of the Beichun Kingdom. Know the battle of TSS? But this time, Bailey Hongzhuang actually didn't appear and cultivated by herself. This was too rare. Although cultivation was extremely important, it was only a few days' time. Bailey Hongzhuang didn't even take the time to take a look. Could it be that Bailey Hongzhuang had cultivated so hard to such an extent? However, Bailey Hongzhuang's actions made many disciples admire Bailey Hongzhuang even more. It was precisely because of Bailey Hongzhuang's hard work that her cultivation was able to improve so quickly. If not, a new disciple breaking into the finals was something that no one had ever thought of before. Chapter 2259. 3 days later, Bailey Hongzhuang exited her cultivation state and headed to the martial arts arena early. Today was her first match in the finals, and her opponent was so interesting. She had always been curious about the strength of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's #1 expert. Today, she had the opportunity to learn from each other. The three beasties followed behind Bailey Hongzhuang excitedly. They had a chance to show off their skills today. Xiaohei, Xiaobai, you have to perform well today. Bailey Hongzhuang patted Xiaohei and Xiaobai's heads. Today's match was going to be a tough one. She had always had a certain level of confidence in her own abilities, but she also knew the gap between her and Shun Xiuhan. Even if she gave it her all in this match, she might not succeed. No matter what, she had to give it a try. She, Bailey Hongzhuang, was not someone who was afraid of failure. On the contrary, she liked to face difficulties head-on. Only when she knew how big the gap was would she be able to put in more effort to catch up. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Xiaohei and Xiaobai quickly nodded. Master, don't worry. We will definitely perform well today. Previously, when Bai Shi had appeared and killed everyone, Xiaohei and Xiaobai were extremely envious. They also wanted to have a chance to perform well. Fortunately, they still had a chance to perform today. They had to seize this opportunity to let everyone know that they were not incompetent. Looking at the three beasts' high fighting spirit, the smile on Bailey Hongzhuang's lips couldn't help but widen. Calming down, Today was indeed a battle that could temper one's strength. When Bailey Hongzhuang arrived at the martial arts arena, she already knew that almost everyone had bet on Shun Xiuhan's victory, because this was a match where the disparity was too great. Even though Bailey Hongzhuang had defeated the number 2 expert of Black Tortoise Hall, there was always a big gap between the number 2 and the number 1 expert. Shun Xiuhan had been famous in Tiangang sect for a long time and was definitely not someone Bailey Hongzhuang could compare to. However, there was still a small number of people who bet that Bailey Hongzhuang would win, and the stakes were very small. Perhaps it was because the odds were too high that some people wanted to try their luck. Of course, there were also Xia Jiqing and others who supported Bailey Hongzhuang. Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's Shun Xiuhan versus Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's Bailey Hongzhuang. The referee elder's voice rang out. Today, everyone was here to watch the competition between Bailey Hongzhuang and Shun Xiuhan, so there was no need to waste any time. Bailey Hongzhuang quickly walked up to the stage, and Shun Xiuhan appeared opposite her. When enemies meet, their eyes blaze with hatred. However, regardless of whether it was Bailey Hongzhuang or Shun Xiuhan, they were both people who did not show their emotions on their faces, so they appear to be relatively harmonious. Bailey Hongzhuang, you should just directly admit defeat. As soon as he came up, Shun Xiuhan's arrogant voice rang out. You really think you're so great. The moment you open your mouth, you speak with a high and mighty attitude. I've been unhappy with you for a long time. Bailey Hongzhuang's lips curled into a mocking smile as she looked at Shun Xiuhan. Every time this guy opened his mouth to speak, it gave people the urge to break his nose. Of course, if there was a chance, Bailey Hongzhuang would definitely do so. Chapter 2260. So you're thinking for me? Bailey Hongzhuang was enlightened. Her smile deepened and her eyes were sharp. However, I'm not a sensible person. I'm afraid I'll have to waste your good intentions. As Bailey Hongzhuang's voice fell, Shun Xiuhan's face could not help but turn ugly. After knowing Bailey Hongzhuang's true strength, Shun Xiuhan felt that his attitude towards Bailey Hongzhuang should be better, so he reminded her. However, he did not expect Bailey Hongzhuang to have such a reaction. It was really unpleasant. It's rare for Shun Xiuhan to be so kind. I didn't expect him to be rejected. Xiao Feiyu couldn't help but mock after seeing this scene. Xiao Feiling glanced at Shun Xiuhan on the stage and said, no matter what this guy says, he always acts high and mighty. I'm afraid no one would accept it. Looks like you all have the same thoughts as me. In the entire Tiangang sect, the person I dislike the most is Shun Xiuhan. He thinks he's infallible all day long. This junior sister Bailey has quite a personality. Yinbin couldn't help but speak up. He was famous for his violent temper and battle maniac. All along, he wanted to compete with Shun Xiuhan. However, Shun Xiuhan was always unwilling to respond directly. It was as if he was the busiest person in the world and didn't want to waste any time. It was because of this that Yinbin was increasingly unhappy with Shun Xiuhan. It seems like there are many people who dislike Shun Xiuhan. Xiao Feilin chuckled and said, as the experts of the 4 side halls, they were often compared by the disciples. Naturally, there were many opportunities for them to meet. Although they competed with each other in terms of strength, it didn't prevent them from forming friendships. Since you're so insistent, I can only fulfill your wish. Shun Xiuhan looked at Bailey Hongzhuang indifferently. He had already said what he wanted to say. If Bailey Hongzhuang didn't accept it, there was nothing he could do. Seeing Shun Xiuhan like this, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but sigh. She really didn't know how this guy had developed such a character. Such a personality was not good. It was too easy to offend people. Only after being taught a harsh lesson would Shun Xiuhan's temper change. Cut the crap, let's do it. Bailey Hongzhuang could not be bothered to talk nonsense with Shun Xiuhan. The elemental energy in her body exploded in an instant. She did not hide her Green Realm level 4 aura at all. Considering your age, it's indeed impressive that you're at level 4 Green Realm. However, it's still not enough to compete with me. Shun Xiuhan snorted coldly. A torrential wave of elemental energy swept out from his body. The elemental energy in the surrounding air began to boil. Following that, an aura that was much stronger than Bailey Hongzhuang's erupted. Green Realm Level 7. It was only at this moment that Shun Xiuhan revealed his true strength. From the moment Bailey Hongzhuang defeated Yin Yuhuan, Shun Xiuhan had already put away his underestimation of Bailey Hongzhuang. If he were to fail miserably in this battle, it would be the most unacceptable thing. After knowing Shun Xiuhan's true strength, the disciples present couldn't help but exclaim, Shun Xiuhan is already at level 7 Green Realm. No wonder he's the #1 expert in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. The difference in strength is too great. How can they fight? Bailey Hongzhuang will definitely lose. Chapter 2261. After sensing Shun Xiuhan's strength, Bailey Hongzhuang's gaze changed. Black Tortoise Temple's #2 expert was at Green Realm Level 4. She did not expect the #1 expert to be 3 levels higher than the #2 expert. With such a difference in strength, it was almost impossible for the #2 expert to defeat the #1 expert. It would take a very long time to reach the 3rd tier. In order to increase her strength quickly, she had spent more cultivation resources than she had in the past. Moreover, this was with the help of the desert world and the rich origin energy in the cultivation room. Without these, it would take at least half a year or even a year for an ordinary disciple to increase their strength by 3 levels. Therefore, unless one was lucky enough, it was impossible to catch up. After Shun Xiuhan's aura was released, Bailey Hongzhuang's heart skipped a beat, and the blood aura field instantly exploded. The entire battle arena was instantly enveloped by a thick blood aura. Following that, Bailey Hongzhuang's gaze suddenly became sharp, and a thick energy exploded from her body. Boom! The instant the blood chi field spread out, the entire sky around the stage seemed to be enveloped by a huge pressure. Following that, under the shocked gazes of countless people, Shun Xiuhan's Green Realm Level 7 cultivation was forcefully suppressed to Green Realm Level 5. Not only that, Bailey Hongzhuang's aura also rose from Green Realm Level 4 to Green Realm Level 5. Seeing this scene, all the disciples were dumbfounded. Could it be? Could this be the true power of the blood aura field? Weakening the opponent's cultivation and then increasing one's own cultivation. In this way, the difference of 3 levels is reduced to 0. If that's really the case, isn't the power of the blood aura field too heaven-defying? No wonder so many people went to the Bloodground Abyss to train. This inheritance is so heaven-defying. It's simply a weapon to fight above one's level. When Yin Yuhuan knew that Bailey Hongzhuang was going to fight today, he specially rushed over. After a few days of recuperation, he had already recovered from his injuries. As for the others, he did not care that much. As a senior disciple, he knew the strength of the top experts of the 4 temples. What he really wanted to know was Bailey Hongzhuang's strength. Today, Bailey Hongzhuang's opponent was Shun Xiuhan. In this battle, Bailey Hongzhuang would not hold back her trump cards. Only in this kind of battle would he be able to understand Bailey Hongzhuang's true strength. There was no reason why he wanted to know so badly. He just wanted to know how much stronger Bailey Hongzhuang was than himself. After all, every cultivator who had failed was obsessed with defeating their opponent. When Yin Yuhuan saw that Bailey Hongzhuang had released the blood aura field and directly suppressed Shun Xiuhan's strength to Green Realm Level 5, he was completely shocked. When Bailey Hongzhuang had fought with him, she had not suppressed his strength to this extent. Once Bailey Hongzhuang had done so, he would not have been a match for Bailey Hongzhuang. At this moment, Yin Yuhuan suddenly understood that Bailey Hongzhuang had left him some face. Chapter 2262. To a cultivator, losing confidence was the scariest thing. Once one lost confidence, one's cultivation would stagnate and be stuck in a bottleneck. After all, he had cultivated for so long, yet he was easily defeated by someone else. This was something that he could not accept. Yin Yuan's gaze fell on Bailey Hongzhuang. He suddenly understood that the kindness he had shown to Bailey Hongzhuang before the competition had saved him. If her attitude was as hateful as Shen Xiuhan's, she was afraid that Bailey Hongzhuang would have easily defeated her. However, after knowing that Bailey Hongzhuang still had more cards up her sleeve, Yin Yuan also began to look forward to it. He didn't know how far Bailey Hongzhuang could go. If Bailey Hongzhuang could defeat Shen Xiuhan, it would be shocking. When Shen Xiuhan saw that his cultivation level had been suppressed to level 5 by Bailey Hongzhuang, a trace of panic flashed across his cold and arrogant face. He had never encountered such a situation before. Bailey Hongzhuang had also never displayed such ability in the previous competitions. Could it be that this is the true power of the blood aura? Shen Xiuhan said slowly. Looks like you're not stupid. The power of the blood aura is indeed not bad. However, if you want to defeat me with the power of the blood aura, that's still a fantasy. Shen Xiuhan snorted. At this moment, he had already put away his arrogant attitude and turned to face Bailey Hongzhuang. He regarded Bailey Hongzhuang as a real opponent. In the next moment, Shen Xiuhan's cultivation level increased again in front of everyone's shocked eyes. Level 6 of Green Realm. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes narrowed. She did not expect Shen Xiuhan to have hidden his true strength. In that case, Shen Xiuhan's true strength had reached level 8 of Green Realm. This level of strength was indeed impressive. Even if you have suppressed my cultivation level, you are still no match for me. Shen Xiuhan's eyes were cold. He had wanted to preserve his strength, and only reveal it when he met Xiao Feilin and the rest. He did not expect Bailey Hongzhuang's blood aura to force him to reveal his true strength. If not for Bailey Hongzhuang's arrogance with the blood aura, he would not have done so. Bailey Hongzhuang shrugged her shoulders indifferently, her face showing a bit of impatience. Do you have to say such nonsense every time you fight with someone? Do you think I'll give up just because you say a few words? I, Bailey Hongzhuang, am not scared. As Bailey Hongzhuang's voice fell, Shen Xiuhan's eyes were cold again. His foot slammed down, and his figure was like lightning as he directly attacked Bailey Hongzhuang. Shen Xiuhan's hands were in the shape of claws. The bones of his fingers were hard and sharp. It was as if he would take one's life with just one claw. The sharp claws brought about a fierce wind that rapidly enlarged in Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes. With just one look, Bailey Hongzhuang knew that Shen Xiuhan had been practicing his claw technique for a long time. If not, it would not be so terrifying. Just as Shen Xiuhan's attack was about to touch Bailey Hongzhuang, the glazed sword appeared in Bailey Hongzhuang's hand. Even though Bailey Hongzhuang had a certain level of confidence in her physical strength, she still had to be on guard against such a powerful claw technique. Ding! Chapter 2263. Hearing this voice, Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes couldn't help but flash with shock. It seemed that her judgment was right. Shen Xiuhan's claws were as hard as iron. If she were to fight with him without any preparation, her hands would have been crippled. Ding, ding, ding. Shen Xiuhan's claws turned into sharp weapons and attacked Bailey Hongzhuang at lightning speed. He had been practicing claw techniques since he was young. Among his peers, his claw techniques were unparalleled. This claw technique was one of his greatest weapons. The sound of metal clashing could be heard. Shen Xiuhan's claws were as fast as lightning and as agile as a snake. It was impossible to guard against. When the claws and the glass sword collided, sparks flew everywhere. It was terrifying. Shen Xiuhan's attack was like a storm, not giving Bailey Hongzhuang any chance to rest. Once Bailey Hongzhuang relaxed, Shen Xiuhan would take advantage of the situation. Bailey Hongzhuang's mental strength was 100% focused, and she used shape-shifting skill from time to time. Shen Xiuhan's reputation as the top expert in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall was not undeserved. Whether it was his fighting skills or the density of his elemental energy, It was far from what an ordinary cultivator could compare to. If Bailey Hongzhuang had not cultivated shape-shifting skill to a certain level, she would have been outshone by Shen Xiuhan's terrifying and fierce attacks. The two figures were like a whirlwind. The crowd could only see the red and white colors intertwining and the spreading flames. Under such circumstances, Bailey Hongzhuang could not help but be shocked. If it was not for the blood aura field that suppressed Shen Xiuhan's strength to such a level, she would not be his opponent. Shen Xiuhan's fighting skills were definitely not comparable to an ordinary Green Realm Level 8 cultivator. His fighting skills had probably reached Green Realm Level 9. Shen Xiuhan's claw technique is getting more and more terrifying. If it's close combat, I'm afraid very few people are his opponent. Xiao Feiyu narrowed her eyes. She had experienced Shen Xiuhan's claw technique before, but it was obviously not to this extent. This junior sister Bailey's strength is indeed impressive. It is not easy for her to be able to withstand Shen Xiuhan's stormy attacks. The way Xiao Feilin looked at Bailey Hongzhuang gradually changed. Even though he already knew that Bailey Hongzhuang was very talented, it was still very shocking that she could withstand Shen Xiuhan's claw technique. Junior sister Bailey's movement technique is very powerful. If not for the combination of this movement technique, I'm afraid junior sister Bailey would not have been able to withstand it, Yin Bin said slowly. Shen Xiuhan's attacking style was completely different from how he usually looked. He usually looked cold and aloof, but once he started fighting, he did not give his opponent any chance to breathe. Therefore, cultivators were most unwilling to encounter such opponents. They were simply too tiring. However, Yin Bin was an exception. He was a battle maniac, and his favorite opponent was Shen Xiuhan's fighting style. It was precisely because of this that he usually liked to spar with Shen Xiuhan. However, this guy did not give him any face every time, which made him very unhappy. As the battle progressed, Bailey Hongzhuang increasingly felt that she could not fight Shen Xiuhan in close combat anymore. Otherwise, it would be very disadvantageous for her if this continued. White Lion and Bailey Hongzhuang could be said to be of the same mind. After Bailey Hongzhuang made such a decision, White Lion instantly pounced on Shen Xiuhan. Seeing White Lion's sudden attack, Shen Xiuhan could only quickly retreat to avoid White Lion's attack. Chapter 2264. White Lion had no intention of fighting Shen Xiuhan head-on. Hence, when Shen Xiuhan turned to face him, he turned to the other side. White Lion's strength had reached the green state, but there was still a large gap between him and Shen Xiuhan. Furthermore, White Lion was unable to unleash its full potential against someone like Shen Xiuhan, who was too strong in close combat. When Shen Xiuhan saw that Bailey Hongzhuang had already unleashed her martial technique on the other side of the stage, he was a little depressed, but there was nothing he could do. His close combat skills had always been very strong, so most of the time, he would be able to finish off his opponents in close combat. He would always seize the opportunity and not give his opponents any chance to escape. Unfortunately, Bailey Hongzhuang had White Lion's help and managed to escape. Shen Xiuhan's depressed expression disappeared in a flash, and he quickly returned to normal. Towering Heaven Demon Lotus. Bailey Hongzhuang unleashed her martial technique very quickly. With a thought, the Towering Heaven Demon Lotus attacked Shen Xiuhan directly. Seeing this, Shen Xiuhan quickly formed a seal in his hand. Following that, a huge black claw formed in midair and emitted a powerful and terrifying force. Black Netherworld Claw. Bang! The two attacks quickly collided in midair and exploded with an extremely tyrannical force. The entire sky was filled with a terrifying Yuan Qi storm. In an instant, the wind and clouds surged and the sky above the stage was covered by the two attacks. Even the sunlight could not shine in. Very quickly, the two attacks dissipated and the two of them did not hesitate to unleash their martial techniques again. Shen Xiuhan was in a bad mood. With the difference in strength between him and Bailey Hongzhuang, it should be a simple matter to finish off Bailey Hongzhuang. However, he had been entangled with Bailey Hongzhuang for so long, and this was not a good thing. To Bailey Hongzhuang, the longer the battle went on, the more advantageous it would be for her. On the contrary, the more disadvantageous it would be for Shun Xiuhan. He did not want to become Bailey Hongzhuang's stepping stone, so he had to end the battle quickly. Monstrous Yuan power surged out of Shun Xiuhan's body and flowed into his hands. If one were to observe carefully, they would notice that Shun Xiuhan's brows were constantly furrowed. The suppression of the blood chi field made him feel very unhappy. Originally, he was able to display a powerful strength, but now all of it was suppressed. Even the power of his martial skill was suppressed. It was really unpleasant. Bailey Hongzhuang felt Shun Xiuhan's elemental energy vibrations, and her heart sank. Shun Xiuhan's ability was indeed extraordinary. Even though Shun Xiuhan's martial technique had yet to take form, she could feel that this martial technique was very powerful. It was definitely an Earth-grade martial technique. If she guessed correctly, this should be the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's Earth-rank martial skill. Vermilion Bird Spirit. Following Shun Xiuhan's cold shout, fiery red energy suddenly erupted from behind him. Then, under everyone's shocked gazes, the fiery red energy gradually transformed into a fiery red vermilion bird. With the appearance of this vermilion bird, the temperature of the entire martial arts stage instantly rose, wave after wave of heat waves. This is the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's Earth-grade martial technique, Vermilion Bird Spirit. As a new disciple, Bailey Hongzhuang has yet to have the opportunity to learn the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's Earth-grade martial technique. It looks like Bailey Hongzhuang is at a disadvantage. Chapter 2265. Following the appearance of the Vermilion Bird Spirit, Shun Xiuhan's entire body seemed to be covered in a layer of flaming armor, majestic and imposing. The raging flames set off his handsome, cold, and arrogant face, giving him a sense of nobility. Burial of the Sea of Flames. Bailey Hongzhuang displayed the Burial of the Sea of Flames at the same time, and a surging fiery red energy swept out in an instant. The temperature on the stage rose again. Like a sea of flames, the heat waves assaulted everyone. The disciples on the spectators' stand were already sweating from the heat. Both of their martial skills were actually flames, and the air was completely distorted by the heat waves. The two types of red contended against each other in the air, then crashed into each other. Boom! An extremely ear-piercing sound of sonic boom reverberated, mixed with a shocking heat wave, like fireworks exploding in the air. Sparks flew in all directions as energy surged wildly. The protective barrier lost control once again, rippling unevenly, as if it would explode at any time. The entire sky had been swept up by the energy storm, and the tongues of flames were swallowing, burning everything that could be burned. In the eyes of the crowd, they could only see the billowing flames and could not see the figures within. This total was even more terrifying and shocking than when Bailey Hongzhuang and Yin Yuhuan had exchanged blows. Everyone's gaze was focused on the stage. Under the power of the flames, it was very likely that they would be burned. It was also an Earth-grade martial skill, but the power displayed by Shun Xiuhan was much stronger. The heat waves continued to churn, like a dancing fire dragon, sweeping through the air, enjoying the crowd's shocked gazes. After a long while, the aftershock dissipated, and the crowd could see the situation on the stage clearly. With one look, the crowd's expression changed. The originally white and glossy stage had now been burnt into a charred black, and even the stones had signs of melting. Kacha! A soft sound suddenly rang out, and following that, a series of cracking sounds spread out continuously. A crack suddenly appeared in the middle of the stage, and following that, the crack rapidly spread out like a spider's web. In a short span of time, the entire stage had split into pieces. Most importantly, After the stage had split into pieces, it had rapidly turned into powder. It was obvious that the previous competition had completely destroyed the structure of the battling platform. The surrounding disciples couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. This was the power of a powerhouse's attack. The destructive power was astonishing. Then, everyone's eyes fell on Shun Xiuhan and Bailey Hongzhuang. Even such a sturdy battle stage had been reduced to such a state. He wondered what would happen to Shun Xiuhan and Bailey Hongzhuang. Shun Xiuhan still had a cold expression on his face. His clothes were slightly charred, and there were a few blossoms of blood on his sleeves. However, from his unchanging expression, it could be seen that he was not seriously injured in this confrontation. On the other hand, Bailey Hongzhuang's injuries were much more serious than Shun Xiuhan's. Drip, drip. The sound of blood dripping slowly rang out, dyeing the ground red. Her delicate face had already turned pale, and her aura was much weaker than before. Poochie. Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't control the taste of blood in her mouth. She spat out a mouthful of blood, and her whole body became even weaker. Chapter 2266. Bailey Hongzhuang has lost this round. Xiao Feilin sighed. He admired this new junior sister of his. It was rare for her to be able to reach this stage, but it was a pity that her opponent was Shun Xiuhan. Although Bailey Hongzhuang's injuries are serious, Shun Xiuhan's injuries are not light either. No matter what, Bailey Hongzhuang was able to force Shun Xiuhan to this stage. It is not easy. Xiao Feilin's eyes shone with admiration. As a 19-year-old girl, Bailey Hongzhuang could already look down on everyone. Shun Xiuhan's cold and arrogant gaze landed on Bailey Hongzhuang. I have already said that you are no match for me. Now admit defeat. The cold voice was a bit disdainful, but in Bailey Hongzhuang's ears, there was a bit of pity. Bailey Hongzhuang's lips suddenly curled into a smile. No matter what you say, you always give people the feeling that you are asking for a beating. She knew very well that Shun Xiuhan's words were not out of kindness, but because he did not want to waste too much time on her. But it was this kind of high and mighty attitude that Bailey Hongzhuang could not stand. So what? Shun Xiuhan's gaze turned even colder. You're no match for me. Do you expect me to respect you? What a laughable ego. At this point, Shun Xiuhan was no longer polite. He had always despised the self-righteous ego of some cultivators. Was there any meaning in protecting that laughable ego when they did not have the ability? So what if they wanted to protect it? Without the ability, they did not have the right to protect it. Losers should accept this result. As Shun Xiuhan's words fell, the expressions of many cultivators present turned ugly. Shun Xiuhan's words are too much. In any case, Bailey Hongzhuang is still a girl. Isn't his words the same as ruthlessly trampling on a person's pride? I was wondering why Shun Xiuhan was usually so arrogant. It turns out that he looks down on everyone. Only some idiots would think that Shun Xiuhan is charming. In fact, he looks down on her from the bottom of his heart. Shun Xiuhan is really just standing there and talking. When he was Bailey Hongzhuang's age, he did not have the strength of Bailey Hongzhuang. Xia Jiqing and the others were also angry at this moment. This guy's words were really asking for a beating. Listening to Shun Xiuhan's harsh and mocking words, Bailey Hongzhuang chuckled. This guy was cold-blooded and ruthless. Have I ever told you that you look like you need a spanking? Bailey Hongzhuang suddenly asked. Shun Xiuhan frowned slightly. In fact, no one had ever dared to say such things to him. For people who are asking for a beating, they can only be dealt with. A guy like you looks down on others just because you have some strength. Don't you think about it? Among all the cultivators in the Shengxian continent, who are you? You don't know how those who have their egos trampled on by you feel, do you? Bailey Hongzhuang's smile was bewitching and charming. She was like a demon, but her eyes were suddenly as sharp as a knife. But very soon, you will know what kind of feeling it is. Chapter 2267. Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang like this, the three beasts couldn't help but look at each other. Based on their understanding of their master, when their master showed such an expression, it meant that she was angry. With their master's calm temperament, ordinary things wouldn't make her angry. However, Shun Xiuhan's words really made them unhappy. Not only was their master angry, but they also looked at Shun Xiuhan with displeasure. They didn't know where this guy came from. It was fine if he thought highly of himself, but he was actually so arrogant. If they didn't teach him a lesson, it wouldn't be their character. Bailey Hongzhuang's deep eyes flashed with a dazzling light, and an unusual aura exploded from her body. Shun Xiuhan looked at Bailey Hongzhuang, and his gaze changed a little. At this moment, Bailey Hongzhuang looked very different from before. However, Shun Xiuhan was only surprised for a moment, and he didn't take it to heart. If you continue to resist stubbornly, it's futile. The courage of an ignorant person is meaningless. It will only make you more miserable. Shun Xiuhan had already determined that Bailey Hongzhuang wasn't his opponent. No matter how angry a cockroach was, it was still a cockroach. It wouldn't affect him at all. On the contrary, the more Bailey Hongzhuang acted like this, the more pitiful Bailey Hongzhuang was. Xiao Feilin and the rest frowned when they heard Shun Xiuhan's increasingly excessive words. Even if Bailey Hongzhuang and Shun Xiuhan had a certain amount of conflict, it shouldn't have reached this stage. Shun Xiuhan is too ruthless. Is this guy deliberately trying to destroy Bailey Hongzhuang's confidence? Xiao Feiyu's expression became serious. Previously, she didn't feel anything, but now she realized that there was something unusual. Following Xiao Feiyu's words, Xiao Feilin and Yin Bin's expressions gradually changed, and their gazes became even more complicated. If Shun Xiuhan's goal is really like this, then it's indeed a little heartless. For cultivators, failure was not scary. What was scary was losing confidence. Shun Xiuhan's words were clearly meant to infuriate Bailey Hongzhuang. Once Bailey Hongzhuang unleashed all her strength and was defeated by Shun Xiuhan, Bailey Hongzhuang would not be able to recover in the future. This battle would become a shadow in her heart that would not dissipate for a long time. I think that's what Shun Xiuhan is planning. Yin Bin was an impatient person. He did not need to think too much about such matters. Shun Xiuhan's actions were already very obvious. Usually, I still think that Shun Xiuhan is a character. Why do I look down on Shun Xiuhan more and more now? To actually use such despicable means on Junior Sister. How despicable. Xiao Feilin and Xiao Feiyu couldn't help but look at Yin Bin. This guy really could say anything on the high platform. Deep Beichun and the 5 Palace Masters frowned. They also felt that Shun Xiuhan's actions were inappropriate. However, as long as it wasn't a life-threatening situation, they wouldn't interfere in a battle on the stage. It was just a battle of words between two disciples. It was really not suitable for them to interfere. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.